Charles Haanel, The New Psychology. Chapter 12, The Psychology of Medicine. To the development of radio communication is largely due the incentive to the imagination of science and the dawning of an idea that a few years ago would have been considered revolutionary and subversive of all the established traditions of medicine. The psychical method has always played an important, though largely unrecognized, part in therapeutics. It is from faith, which buoys up the spirits, sets the blood flowing more freely, and the nerves playing their parts without disturbance, that a large part of all cures arise. Despondency or lack of faith will often sink the stoutest constitution almost to death's door. Faith will enable a bread pill or a spoonful of clear water to do almost miracles of healing, when the best medicines have been given over in despair. The basis of the entire profession of medicine is faith in the doctor and his drugs and his methods. Charles Richet, professor of physiology in the University of Paris, is blazing the trail for those hardy pioneering scientists who are now exploring the borderland of the senses. In an address before the International Congress of Physiologists in Edinburgh, as quoted by The Lancet, a leading British medical journal, Dr. Richet said, "The thesis which I wish to sustain and to prove by the experimental method is that there may be knowledge of reality obtained by other means than by the ordinary channels of the senses. Everyone knows that the external world is accessible to us by our senses, by vision, hearing, and touch, and to a less extent by smell and taste. No other ways are known. It is the universal opinion that we can have no other notion of the reality that surrounds us except through our five senses, and that any fact must remain forever unknown unless sound, touch, or vision has revealed it to us. This is the classic and at the same time popular idea. It is formal and exclusive, without itself ever having been demonstrated. To admit that a knowledge of occurrences can arrive at our consciousness by any other means than those of the senses is a daring and revolutionary proceeding, and yet this is the thesis that I am about to maintain. The access to our subconscious intelligence of mysterious vibrations is an unusual phenomenon, but it is a phenomenon which is not in contradiction to anything. It is a new truth, that is all. And this new truth is wonderfully in agreement with the amazing notions which modern physics opens to us. At this moment I cannot hear any concert in this hall, nor do you. You might even assert that there are no musical vibrations here. What a mistake! If a wireless receiver were placed here we should all immediately hear a concert that is taking place perhaps 3 miles, or even 100 miles away. The receiver proves that the vibrations are present. Thus it is with those mysterious paths of consciousness. They do not reach us, but they are there. Only a sensitive person, in other words, a receiver, is needed to prove their reality. Therefore, do not hesitate to accept this new fact that unknown vibrations strike an intelligence and bring to it unexpected knowledge. Can physiologists and medical men assert that they have completed the physiology of the brain, that there is nothing further to be discovered about it, and that they have delimited all the modes of vibration of which it is capable? The brain is a much more complicated machine than we are wont to consider it in our innocence. Why may not this marvelous machine be sometimes capable of receiving vibrations which pass unknown to consciousness? Our problem would be simpler, and the doctors, with their wide knowledge and splendid service, would have solved the problem long ago, had it been a purely physical one. But unfortunately it is a mental problem long before it becomes a physical one. As we continue to exercise our capacity for response we shall find it necessary to treat our thoughts and emotions if we are to establish health upon a firm basis. For instance, it is commonly recognized that worry or continued negative emotional excitement will disorganize digestion. When the digestion is normal, the feeling of hunger will stop, will be inhibited when we have eaten as much as we need, nor will we experience hunger again until we actually require food. In such cases, our inhibiting center is working properly. But if we get irritable, this inhibiting center has ceased to function, and we are hungry all the time with the consequent tendency to overwork an already impaired digestive apparatus. Mankind is continually experiencing such small disturbances. They are strictly local and attract small attention at the great center. They come and go and properly so without drawing from the organism as a whole much consideration. But if the disorder has grown out of a deep-rooted cause that cannot easily be removed, disease of a more serious nature will ensue. Under such circumstances, by reason of its seriousness and long continuance, the trouble involves all parts of the organism and may threaten its very life. When it reaches this point, if the administration at the grand center is vigorous and determined and wise, then the disturbance cannot long endure, but if there is weakness at that center, the whole federation may go down with a crash. Dr. Lindlar says that nature-cure philosophy presents a rational concept of evil, its cause and purpose, namely, that it is brought on by violation of nature's laws, that it is corrective in its purpose, that it can be overcome only by compliance with the law. There is no suffering, disease, or evil of any kind anywhere unless the law has been transgressed somewhere by someone. These transgressions of the law may be due to ignorance, to indifference, or to willfulness and viciousness. The effect will always be commensurate with the causes. The science of natural living and healing shows clearly that what we call disease is primarily nature's effort to eliminate morbid matter and to restore the normal functions of the body, that the processes of disease are just as orderly in their way as everything else in nature, that we must not check or suppress them, but cooperate with them. Thus we can, slowly but laboriously determine, the all-important lesson that obedience to the law is the only means of prevention of disease, and the only cure. The fundamental law of cure, the law of action and reaction, and the law of crisis, as revealed by the nature-cure philosophy, impress upon us the truth that there is nothing accidental or arbitrary in the process of health, disease, and cures, that every changing condition is either in harmony or in discord with the laws of our being, that only by complete surrender and obedience to the law can we master the law and attain and maintain perfect physical health. In our study of the cause and character of disease we must endeavor to begin at the beginning, and that is life itself. For the process of health, disease, and cure are manifestations of that which we call life and vitality. There are two prevalent, but widely differing conceptions of the nature of life or vital force, the material and the vital. The former looks upon life or vital force with all its physical, mental, and psychical phenomena as manifestations of the electric, magnetic, and chemical activities of the physical material electric elements composing the human organism. From this viewpoint, life is a sort of spontaneous combustion, or, as one scientist expressed it, a succession of fermentations. This materialistic conception of life, however, has already become obsolete among the more advanced biologists as a result of the discoveries of modern science, which are fast bridging the chasm between the material and the spiritual realms of being. The vital conception of life or vital force, on the other hand, regards it as the primary force of all forces, coming from the central source of all power. This force, which permeates, warms, and animates the entire created universe, is the expression of the divine will, the logos, the word, of the great creative intelligence. It is this divine energy that sets in motion the whirls in the ether, the electric corpuscles and ions that make up the different atoms and elements of matter. These corpuscles and ions are positive and negative forms of electricity. Electricity is a form of energy. It is intelligent energy, otherwise it could not move with that unvarying, wonderful precision in the electrons of the atoms as in the suns and planets of the sidereal universe. If this supreme intelligence should withdraw its energy, the electrical charges, and with it the atoms and elements, the entire material universe would disappear in the flash of a moment. From this it appears that crude matter, instead of being the source of life and of all its complicated mental and spiritual phenomena, is only an expression of the life force, itself a manifestation of the great creative intelligence which some call God, others nature, the Oversoul, Brahma, Prana, and other sundry names, each one according to his understanding. It is this supreme power and intelligence acting in and through every atom, molecule, and cell in the human body, which is the true healer, this vis medicatrix naturae, which always endeavors to repair, to heal, and to restore the perfect type. All that the physician can do is to remove obstructions and to establish normal conditions within and about the patient so that the power within can do its work to the best advantage. In the final analysis, all things in nature, from a fleeting thought or emotion to the hardest piece of diamond or platinum, are modes of motion or vibration. A few years ago, physical science assumed that an atom was the smallest imaginable part of a given element of matter, that although infinitesimally small, it still represented solid matter. Now, in the light of better evidence, we have good reason to believe that there is no such thing as solid matter, that every atom is made up of charges of negative and positive electricity acting in and upon an omnipresent ether, that the difference between an atom of iron and of hydrogen, or any other element, consists solely in the number of electrical charges or corpuscles it contains and on the velocity with which these vibrate around one another. Thus the atom, which was thought to be the ultimate particle of solid matter, is found to be a little universe in itself in which corpuscles of electricity rotate or vibrate around one another like the suns and planets in the sidereal universe. This explains what we mean when we say life and matter are vibratory. What we call inanimate nature is beautiful and orderly because it plays in tune with the score of the symphony of life. Man alone can play out of tune. This is his privilege or his curse, as he chooses, by virtue of his freedom of choice and action. We can now better understand the definitions of health and of disease given in the Catechism of Nature Cure as follows. Health is normal and harmonious vibration of the elements and forces composing the human entity and the physical, mental, moral, and spiritual planes of being in conformity with the constructive principle of nature applied to individual life. Disease is abnormal or inharmonious vibration of the elements and forces composing the human entity on one or more planes or being in conformity with the destructive principle of nature applied to individual life. The question naturally arising here is normal or abnormal vibration with what? The answer is that the vibratory conditions of the organism must be in harmony with nature's established harmonic relations in the physical, mental, moral, spiritual, and psychical realms of human life and action. Charles Haanel, The New Psychology. Chapter 13, Mental Chemistry. Though an inheritance of acres may be bequeathed, an inheritance of knowledge and wisdom cannot. The wealthy man may pay others for doing his work for him, but it is impossible to get his thinking done for him by another, or to purchase any kind of self-culture. Chemistry is the science which studies the intramolecular changes that materials things undergo various influences. Mental is defined as, of or pertaining to the mind, including intellect, feeling, and will, or the entire rational nature. Science is knowledge gained and verified by exact observation and correct thinking. Mental chemistry is, therefore, the science which treats of the changes that conditions undergo through the operation of the mind. As the transformations that are brought about in applied chemistry are the result of the orderly combination of materials, it follows that mental chemistry brings about results in a like manner. Any conceivable number may be formed with the Arabic numerals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. Any conceivable thought may be expressed with the 26 letters of the alphabet. Any conceivable thing can be organized with the 14 elements and always and only by the proper grouping of electrons into molecules. When two or more molecules are grouped, a new individuality is created, and this individuality that has been called into being possesses characteristics that are not possessed by either of the elements that gave it being. Thus one atom of sodium and one of chlorine give us salt, and this combination alone can give us salt, and no other combination of elements can give us salt, and salt is something very different from either of the elements of which it is composed. What is true in the inorganic world is likewise true in the organic. Certain conscious processes will produce certain effects and the result will invariably be the same. The same thought will always be followed by the same consequence, and no other thought will serve the purpose. This must necessarily be true because the principle must exist independently of the organs through which they function. Light must exist, otherwise there could be no eye. Sound must exist, otherwise there could be no ear. Mind must exist, otherwise there could be no brain. Mental action is therefore the interaction of the individual upon the universal mind, and as the universal mind is the intelligence which pervades all space and animates all living things, this mental action and reaction is the law of causation. It is the universal chemist, but the principle of causation does not obtain in the individual mind but in the universal mind. It is not an objective faculty, but a subjective process. The individual may, however, bring the power into manifestation, and as the possible combinations of thought are infinite, the results are seen in an infinite variety of conditions and experiences. Primordial man, naked and bestial, squatting in gloomy caverns and gnawing bones, was born, lived, and died in a hostile world. His hostility and his wretchedness arose from his ignorance. His handmaidens were hate and fear. His sole reliance was his club. He saw in the beasts, forests, torrents, seas, clouds, and even in his fellow man only enemies. He recognized no ties binding them one to another or to himself. Modern man is born to comparative luxury. Love rocks his cradle and shields his youth. When he goes forth to struggle he wields a pencil, not a club. He relies upon his brain, not his brawn. He knows the physical as neither master nor equal, but as a useful servant. His fellow men in the forces of nature are his friends, not his enemies. These tremendous changes from hate to love, from fear to confidence, from material strife to mental control, have been wrought by the slow dawn of understanding. In direct proportion as he understands cosmic law is man's lot enviable or the reverse. Thought builds organic structures in animals and men. The protoplasmic cell desires the light and sends forth its impulse. This impulse gradually builds an eye. A species of deer feed in a country where the leaves grow on high branches, and the constant reaching for their favorite food builds cell by cell the neck of the giraffe. The amphibian reptiles desire to fly in the open air above the water. They develop wings and become birds. Experiments with parasites found on plants indicate that even the lowest order of life makes use of mental chemistry. Jacques Loeb, M.D., Ph.D., a member of the Rockefeller Institute, made the following experiment. In order to obtain the material, potted rose bushes are brought into a room and placed in front of a closed window. If the plants are allowed to dry out, the aphids, parasites, previously wingless, change to winged insects. After the metamorphosis, the insects leave the plants, fly to the window, and then creep upward on the glass. It is evident that these tiny insects found at the plants on which they had been thriving were dead, and that they could therefore secure nothing more to eat and drink from this source. The only method by which they could save themselves from starvation was to grow temporary wings and fly, which they did. That the brain cells are directly affected by mental pictures and that the brain cells in their turn can affect the entire being was proven by Professor Elmer Gates at the Smithsonian Institution at Washington. Guinea pigs were kept in enclosures with certain colors dominant. Dissections showed their brains to be larger in the color area than those of the same class of guinea pigs kept in other enclosures. The perspiration of men in various mental moods was analyzed and the resultant salts experimented with. Those of a man in an angry state were of an unusual color. A small portion put on the tongue of a dog produced evidences of poisoning. Experiments at Harvard College with students on the weighing board proved that the mind moves the blood. When the student was told to imagine that he was running a foot race, the board sank down at the foot, and when a problem in mathematics was being worked, the balanced board sank down at the head. This shows that thought not only flashes constantly between mind and body with an intensity and swiftness far transcending electricity, but that it also builds the structures through which it operates. Through the conscious mind we know ourselves as individuals and take cognizance of the world about us. The subconscious mind is the storehouse of past thoughts. We can understand the action of the conscious and subconscious minds by observing the process by which the child learns to play piano. He is taught how to hold his hands and strike the keys, but at first he finds it somewhat difficult to control the movement of his fingers. He must practice daily and must concentrate his thoughts upon his fingers, consciously making the right movements. These thoughts, in time, become subconscious. The fingers are directed and controlled in the playing by the subconscious. In his first months, the pupil can perform only by keeping his concentrated mind centered upon the work, but later he can play with ease and at the same time carry on a conversation with those around him, because the subconscious has become so thoroughly imbued with the idea of right movements that it can direct them without demanding the attention of the conscious mind. The subconscious is instinctive desire. It carries out what is suggested by the conscious mind. These suggestions it carries out faithfully, and it is this close relation between the conscious and subconscious that makes conscious thinking so important. Man's organism is controlled by the subconscious thought. Circulation, breathing, digestion, and assimilation are all activities controlled by the subconscious. The subconscious is continually getting its impulses from the conscious, and we have only to change our conscious thought to get a corresponding change in the subconscious. We live in a fathomless sea of plastic mind substance. This substance is ever alive and active. It is sensitive to the highest degree. It takes form according to the mental demand. Thought forms the mold or matrix from which the substance expresses. Our ideal is the mold from which our future will emerge. The universe is alive. In order to express life, there must be mind. Nothing can exist without mind. Everything that exists is some manifestation of this one basic substance from which and by which all things have been created and are continually being recreated. It is man's capacity to think that makes him a creator instead of a creature. All things are the result of the thought process. Man has accomplished the seemingly impossible because he has refused to consider it impossible. By concentration, men have made the connection between the finite and the infinite, the limited and the unlimited, the visible and the invisible, the personal and the impersonal. Great musicians have succeeded in thrilling the world by the creation of divine rhapsodies. Great inventors have made the connection and startled the world by their wonderful creations. Great authors, great philosophers, and great scientists have secured this harmony to such an extent that though their writings were created hundreds of years ago, we are just beginning to realize their truths. Love of music, love of business, and love of creation caused these people to concentrate, and the ways and means of materializing their ideals slowly but surely developed. Throughout the entire universe, the law of cause and effect is ever at work. This law is supreme, here a cause there an effect. They can never operate independently. One is supplementary to the other. Nature at all times is endeavoring to establish a perfect equilibrium. This is the law of the universe and it is ever active. Universal harmony is the goal for which all nature strives. The entire cosmos moves under this law. The sun, the moon, the stars are all held in their respective positions because of harmony. They travel their orbits, they appear at certain times in certain places, and because of the precision of this law, astronomers are able to tell us where various stars will appear in 1,000 years. The scientist bases his entire hypothesis on this law of cause and effect. Nowhere is it held in dispute except in the domain of man. Here we find people speaking of luck, chance, accident, and mishap, but is any one of these possible? Is the universe a unit? If so, and there is law and order in one part, it must extend throughout all parts. This is a scientific deduction. Like begets like on every plane of existence, and while people believe this more or less vaguely, they refuse to give it any consideration where they are concerned. This is due to the fact that heretofore man could never realize how he set certain causes in motion that related to him with his various experiences. It is only in the past few years that a working hypothesis could be formulated to apply this law to man. The goal of the universe is harmony. This means a perfect balance between all things. Ether fills all interplanetary space. This more or less metaphysical substance is the elementary basis of all matter. It is upon this substance that the messages of the wireless are transmitted through space. Thought dropped into this substance causes vibrations, which in turn unite with similar vibrations and react upon the thinker. All manifestations are the result of thought, but the thinking is on different planes. We have one plane of thought constituting the animal plane. Here are actions and interactions that animals respond to, yet men know nothing of. Then we have the conscious thought plane. Here are almost limitless planes of thought to which man may be responsive. It is strictly the nature of our thinking that determines to which plane we shall respond. On this plane, we have the thoughts of the ignorant, the wise, the poor, the wealthy, the sick, the healthy, the very poor, the very sick, and so on. The number of thought planes is infinite, but the point is that when we think on a definite plane, we are responsive to thoughts on that plane, and the effect of the reaction is apparent in our environment. Take for example one who is thinking on the thought plane of wealth. He is inspired with an idea, and the result is success. It could not be otherwise. He is thinking on the success plane, and as like attracts like, his thoughts attract other similar thoughts, all of which contribute to his success. His receiver is attuned for success thoughts only, all other messages fail to reach his consciousness, hence, he knows nothing of them. His antennae, as it were, reach into the universal ether and connect with the ideas by which his plans and ambitions may be realized. Sit right where you are, place an amplifier to your ear, and you may hear the most beautiful music, or a lecture, or the latest market reports. What does this indicate, in addition to the pleasure derived from the music or the information received from the lecture or market report? It indicates first that there must be some substance sufficiently refined to carry these vibrations to every part of the world. Again, it indicates that this substance must be sufficiently refined to penetrate every other substance known to man. The vibrations must penetrate wood, brick, stone, or steel of any kind. They must go over, through, and under rivers, mountains, above the earth, under the earth, everywhere and anywhere. Again, it indicates that time and space have been annihilated. The instant a piece of music is broadcast in Pittsburgh or anywhere else, by putting the proper mechanism to your ear you can get it as clearly and distinctly as though you were in the same room. This indicates that these vibrations proceed in every direction. Wherever there is an ear to hear, it may hear. If, then, there is a substance so refined that it will take up the human voice and send it in every direction so that every human being who is equipped with the proper mechanism may receive the message, is it not possible that the same substance will carry a thought just as readily and just as certainly? Most assuredly. How do we know this? By experimentation. This is the only way to be certain of anything. Try it. Make the experiment yourself. Sit right where you are. Select a subject with which you are fairly familiar. Begin to think. The thoughts will follow each other in rapid succession. One thought will suggest another. You will soon be surprised at some of the thoughts that have made you a channel of their manifestation. You did not know that you knew so much about the subject. You did not know that you could put them into such beautiful language. You marvel at the ease and rapidity with which the thoughts arrive. Where do they come from? From the one source of all wisdom, all power, and all understanding. You have been to the source of all knowledge, for every thought which has ever been thought is still in existence, ready and waiting for someone to attach the mechanism by which it can find expression. You can therefore think the thoughts of every sage, every artist, every financier, and every captain of industry who ever existed, for thoughts never die. Suppose your experiment is not entirely successful. Try again. Few of us are proud of our first effort at anything. We did not even make a very great success in trying to walk the first time we tried. If you try again, remember that the brain is the organ of the objective mind, that it is related to the objective world by the cerebrospinal or voluntary nervous system, that this system of nerves is connected with the objective world by a certain mechanism or senses. These are the organs with which we see, hear, feel, taste, and smell. Now, a thought is a thing that can be neither seen nor heard. We cannot taste it, nor can we smell it, nor can we feel it. Evidently, the five senses can be of no possible value in trying to receive a thought. They must therefore be stilled, because thought is a spiritual activity and cannot reach us through any material channel. We will then relax both mentally and physically and send out an SOS for help and await the results. The success of our experiment will then depend entirely upon our ability to become receptive. Scientists like to make use of the word ether in speaking of the substance, in which we live and move and have our being, which is omnipresent, which impenetrates everything, and which is the source of all activity. They like to use the word ether because ether implies something which can be measured, and so far as the materialistic school of scientists is concerned, anything which cannot be measured does not exist. But who can measure an electron? And yet the electron is the basis for all material existence, so far as we know at present. It would require 500 million atoms placed side by side to measure 1 linear inch. A number of atoms equal to 25 million times the population of the Earth must be present in the test tube for a chemist to detect them in a chemical trace. About 125 septillions of atoms are in an cubic inch of lead. And we cannot come anywhere near even seeing an atom through a microscope. Yet the atom is as large as our solar system compared to the electrons of which it is composed. All atoms are alike in having one positive central sun of energy around which one or more negative charges of energy revolve. The number of negative electrons each atom contains determines the nature of the so-called element of which it is a part. An atom of hydrogen, for instance, is supposed to have one negative electron as a satellite to its positive center. For this reason, chemists accept it as a standard of atomic weight. The atomic weight of hydrogen is placed at 1. The diameter of an electron is to the diameter of the atom as the diameter of the Earth is to the diameter of the orbit in which it moves around the Sun. More specifically, it has been determined that an electron is 1/18,000th of the mass of a hydrogen atom. It is clear therefore that matter is capable of a degree of refinement almost beyond the power of the human mind to calculate. We have not as yet been able to analyze this refinement beyond the electron, and even in getting thus far have had to supplement our physical observation of effects with imagination to cover certain gaps. The building up of matter from electrons has been an involuntary process of individualizing intelligent energy. Food, water, and air are usually considered to be the 3 essential elements necessary to sustain life. This is very true, but there is something still more essential. Every time we breathe, we not only fill our lungs with air that has been charged with magnetism by the solar orb, but we fill ourselves with pranic energy, the breath of life replete with every requirement for mind and spirit. This life-giving spirit is far more necessary than air, food, or water, because a man can live for 40 days without food, for 3 days without water, and for a few minutes without air, but he cannot live a single second without ether. It is the one prime essential of life and contains all the essentials of life, so that the process of breathing furnishes not only food for body building, but food for mind and spirit as well. Charles Haanel, The New Psychology. Chapter 14, Mental Medicine. All that a man does outwardly is but the expression and completion of his inward thought. To work effectually, he must think clearly; to act nobly, he must think nobly. Intellectual force is a principal element of the soul's life, and should be proposed by every man as the principle of his being. Channing. In The Law of Mental Medicine, Thomas J. Hudson says, like all laws of nature, the law of mental medicine is universal in its application, and, like all the others, it is simple and easily comprehended. Granted that there is an intelligence that controls the functions of the body in health, it follows that it is the same power or energy that fails in case of disease. Failing, it requires assistance, and that is what all therapeutic agencies aim to accomplish. No intelligent physician of any school claims to be able to do more than to assist nature to restore normal conditions of the body. That it is a mental energy that thus requires assistance, no one denies, for science teaches us that the whole body is made up of a confederation of intelligent entities, each of which performs its functions with an intelligence exactly adapted to the performance of its special duties as a member of the confederacy. There is, indeed, no life without mind, from the lowest unicellular organism up to man. It is, therefore, a mental energy that actuates every fiber of the body under all conditions. That there is a central intelligence that controls each of those mind organisms is self-evident. Whether, as the materialistic scientists insist, this central intelligence is merely the sum of all the cellular intelligences of the bodily organism, or is an independent entity, capable of sustaining a separate existence after the body perishes, is a question that does not concern us in the pursuance of the present inquiry. It is sufficient for us to know that such intelligence exists and that, for the time being, it is the controlling energy that normally regulates the action of the myriad cells of which the body is composed. It is, then, a mental organism that all therapeutic agencies are designed to energize, when, for any cause, it fails to perform its functions with reference to any part of the physical structure. It follows that mental therapeutic agencies are the primary and normal means of energizing the mental organism. That is to say, mental agencies operate more directly than any other, because more intelligibly, upon a mental organism, although physical agencies are by no means excluded, for all experience shows that a mental organism responds to physical as well as mental stimuli. All that can be reasonably claimed is that in therapeutics, mental stimulus is necessarily more direct and more positive in its effects, other things being equal, than a physical stimulus can be, for the simple reason that it is intelligent on the one hand and intelligible on the other. It must be remarked, however, that it is obviously impossible wholly to eliminate mental suggestion even in the administration of mental remedies. Extremists claim that the whole effect of material remedies is due to the factor of mental suggestion, but this seems to be untenable. The most that can be claimed with any degree of certainty is that material remedies, when they are not in themselves positively injurious, are good and legitimate forms of suggestions, and, as such, are invested with a certain therapeutic potency, as in the administration of the placebo. It is also certain that, whether the remedies are material or mental, they must, directly or indirectly, energize the mental organism in control of the bodily functions. Otherwise, the therapeutic effects produced cannot be permanent. It follows that the therapeutic value of all remedial agencies, material or mental, is proportioned to their respective powers to produce the effect of stimulating the subjective mind to a state of normal activity in directing its energies into appropriate channels. We know that suggestion fills this requirement more directly and positively than any other known therapeutic agent, and this is all that needs to be done for the restoration of health in any case outside the domain of surgery. It is all that can be done. No power in the universe can do more than energize the mental organism that is the seat and source of health within the body. A miracle could do no more. Professor Clouston, in his inaugural address to the Royal Medical Society in 1896, says, "I would desire this evening to lie down or enforce a principle that is, I think, not sufficiently, and often not at all, considered in practical medicine and surgery. It is founded on a physiological basis and it is of the highest practical importance. The principle is that the brain cortex, and especially the mental cortex, has such a position in the economy that it has to be reckoned with more or less as a factor for good or evil in all diseases of every organ, in all operations, and in all injuries. Physiologically, the cortex is the great regulator of all functions, the ever-active controller of every organ disturbance. We know that every organ and every function are represented that they may be brought into the right relationship and harmony with each other, and so they all may be converted into a vital unity through it. Life and mind are the two factors of that organic unity that constitute a real animal organism. The mental cortex of man is the apex of the evolutionary pyramid, whose base is composed of the swarming pyramids of bacilli and other monocellular germs which we now see to be almost all-pervading in nature. It seems as if it has been the teleological aim of all evolution from the beginning. In it, every other organ and function find their organic end. In histological structure so far as we know this, it far exceeds all other organs in complexity. When we fully know the structure of each neuron, with its hundreds of fibers and its thousands of dendrites, and the relation of one neuron to another, when we can demonstrate the cortical apparatus for universal intercommunication of nervous energy, with its absolute solidarity, its partial localization, and its wondrous arrangements for mind, motion, sensibility, nutrition, repair, and drainage, when we fully know all this, there will be no further question of the dominance of the brain cortex in the organic hierarchy, nor of its supreme importance in disease. The Lancet records a case of Dr. Barkus of a woman with supposed disease of every organ, with pains everywhere, who tried every method of cure, but was at last experimentally cured by mental therapeutics pure and simple. Assured that death would result from her state, and that a certain medicine would infallibly cure her, provided it was administered by an experienced nurse, 1 tablespoonful of pure distilled water was given her at 7, 12, 5, and 10, to the second with scrupulous care, and in less than 3 weeks all pain ceased, all diseases were cured, and remained so. This is a valuable experiment as excluding every material remedy whatever and proving that it is the mental factor alone that cures. However, it may be generally associated with material remedies. Dr. Morrison of Edinburgh discovered that a lady who had constant violent hysterical attacks had given her hand to one man and her heart to another. A little direct common sense talk in this case formed an agreeable substitute for the distilled water in the other, and the patient never had another attack. Many seem to think only nervous or functional diseases are cured by mental or spiritual methods, but Alfred T. Schofield, M.D. tells in The Force of Mind. In one long list of 250 published cases of disease cured, we find 5 consumption, 1 diseased hip, 5 abscess, 3 dyspepsia, 4 internal complaint, 2 throat ulcer, 7 nervous debility, 9 rheumatism, 5 diseased heart, 2 withered arm, 4 bronchitis, 3 cancer, 2 paralyzed arm, 3 weak eyes, 1 ruptured spine, 5 pains in the head. And these are the results in 1 year at one small chapel in the north of London. What about the cures at home and continental spas, with their eternal round of sulfur and iron waters and baths? Does the doctor attached to the spa in his heart of hearts believe that all the cures which in these cases he cheerfully certifies to are effected by the waters, or even the waters and the diet, or even the waters and the diet and the air? Or does he not think there must be a something else as well? And to come nearer home and into the center of all things and the chamber of all his secrets. In his own consulting room and in his own practice, is not the physician brought face to face with cures and diseases, too, the cause of which he cannot account for? And is he not often surprised to find a continuation of the same treatment originated by the local practitioners is, when continued by his august self, effective? And is not the local practitioner not only surprised but disgusted as well to find such is the case? Does any practical medical man, after all, really doubt these mental powers? Is he not aware of the ingredient, faith, which, if added to his prescriptions, makes them often all-powerful for good? Does he know experimentally the value of strongly asserting that the medicine will produce such and such effects as a powerful means of securing them? If, then, this power is so well known, why in the name of common sense is it ignored? It has its laws of action, its limitations, and its power for good and for evil. Would it not clearly help the medical student if these were indicated to him by his lawful teachers instead of his gleaning them uncertainly from the undoubted successes of the large army of irregulars? We are, however, inclined to think that, after all, a silent revolution is slowly taking place in the minds of medical men, and that our present textbooks on disease, content with merely prescribing any mental cure in a single line as unworthy of serious consideration, will in time be replaced by others containing views more worthy of the century in which we live. Charles Haanel, The New Psychology. Chapter 15, Orthobiosis. Every day that is born into the world comes like a burst of music and rings itself all the day through, and thou shalt make of it a dance, a dirge or a life march as thou wilt. Carlyle. Virgil says, happy is he who has found the cause of things. It was Metchnikoff who tried, after his investigations into the physical, to apply ethics to life, so that life might be lived to the full, which is the true wisdom. He called this condition orthobiosis. He held that the end of science is to rid the world of its scourges through hygiene and other measures of prophylaxis. Our manner of life, says Madame Metchnikoff, transcribing her husband's ideas, will have to be modified and directed according to rational and scientific data if we are to run through the normal cycle of life orthobiosis. The pursuit of that goal will ever influence the basis of morals. Orthobiosis cannot be accessible to all until knowledge, rectitude, and solidarity increases among men and until social conditions are kinder. Like all faculties, faith has a center through which it functions, the pineal gland. Faith is therefore physical, just as disease may be spiritual. Spirit and body are but parts of a glorious whole. The cure of disease requires the use of cosmic force, and who shall say that that force, whether we call it God, nature, over soul, Brahma, vis medicatrix naturae, prana, logos, or divine will does not manifest itself through material means as well as spiritual. Plato, Dr. Butler tells us, said that man is a plant rooted in heaven, and we agree to this, that he is also rooted in the earth. In fact, man may be said to have two origins, one earthly and physical, the other spiritual, though the former originates in the latter so that ultimately the origin is one. Man is an organism. De Quincey defines an organism as a group of parts which act upon the whole in turn acting upon all the parts. This is simple and true. It is paradoxical that mind, though a principal and usually a determining part of a human organism's actions and reactions, has by formal medicine been disregarded as a primary cause in pretty much all of those bodily disorders that are not produced by contagion. But of late years autointoxication and disturbances of the ductless glands have come into increased consideration. Their operations are being gradually traced to origins beyond the physical body, and definitely located in states of mind. These states are coming within the scope of diagnosis. Enlightened medical art brings them under treatment. Recognition of the influence of mind upon the body was recognized even of old, as far back as Hippocrates and probably anterior to him. Mandeville, in the 14th century, approved of the custom of reciting certain verses of the Psalms when taking medicine, nor was he averse to pilgrimages undertaken in search of health. He held that no harm could be done, while the potentialities of good were great. The value of the physical exercise in going on a pilgrimage, usually on foot with most of the time spent in the open air, need scarcely be pointed out. Many a cure of lethargy and obesity in the Middle Ages and after owed its efficacy to the insistence of famous physicians that the patients, no matter how wealthy or highborn, were to come from their dwellings on foot, in all humility, refusing to extend treatment otherwise. Ignatius of Loyola is credited with saying, "Do everything you can with the idea that everything depends on you and then hope for results just as if everything depended on God." It will be found the sanest, most Catholic and liberal exponents of each school of healing generously admit the value of other schools and the limitations of their own. The responsible healer of the future, who truly respects his honorable calling, will employ all beneficial, constructive agencies at the disposal of science. Thus, we have an eminent occultist saying, "In cases of misplacement, dislocation, or broken bones, the quickest way to obtain relief is to send for a competent physician or anatomist and have an adjustment made of the injured member or organ. In cases of disruptions of blood vessels or muscles, a surgeon's aid should be immediately sought, not because mind is unable to cure any or all of these cases, but because of the fact that at the present time, even among educated people, mind is many times impotent through misuse or non-use. Mental treatment should follow these physical treatments in order to obviate unnecessary suffering and to obtain rapid recovery." We cannot do better than to quote Sir William Osier, B.T., M.D., F.R.S.X. The salvation of science lies in a recognition of a new philosophy, the scientia scientiarum, of which Plato speaks. Now when all these studies reach the point of intercommunication and connection with one another and come to be considered in their mutual affinities, then, I think, and not until then, will the pursuit of them have a value. From the old humanities and the new science. Scientists assume that there is one substance only, and therefore their deduced science is the science of that substance and none other, and yet they are confronted with the fact that their one substance is differentiated, and that when they come to the finest degree thereof, as for instance bioplasm, they are brought face to face with the operation of higher laws than they are familiar with or can adequately explain. Many scientists, however, with a broader view, are beginning to glimpse a fourth dimension and recognize the fact that there may be degrees of matter that are utterly beyond their chemical tests and microscopic lens. But a new day is dawning. The telephone, the telegraph, and the wireless are now coming into general use, and it is now possible to make use of every avenue of information and knowledge. It is therefore but a question of time when the sick will have the benefit of all that is known in the art of healing. The physician frequently loses his patient because he refuses to recognize the spiritual nature of the patient, and that because of his spiritual nature there are certain fundamental laws governing in the spiritual world and that these laws continue to operate whether he recognizes them or not. And the metaphysician frequently loses his patient because he refuses to recognize that the body of the patient is the material manifestation of the spirit within, and the condition of the body is but an expression of the spirit. But all this iconoclasm is but the result of a certain conservatism which is both human and natural. With the wisdom which the years are bringing, there will soon be no one who cannot see that the germ is not only the cause of disease, but the result of disease, that bacteria is the result of impure water not the cause of impure water, and so with everything else. What we can see, handle, or touch are never causes, but always effects, and if it is our purpose to simply substitute one form of distress for another, we shall continue to deal with effects and effects only, but if it is our purpose to bring about a remedy, we shall seek the cause by which alone every effect is brought into existence, and this cause will never be found in the world of effects. In the new era, abnormal mental and emotional conditions will be immediately detected and corrected. Tissue in process of destruction will be eliminated or reconstructed by the constructive methods at the disposal of the physician. Abnormal lesions will be corrected by manipulative treatment, but above and beyond all of this will be the primary and essential idea, the idea upon which all results will depend, and that is that no inharmonious or destructive thought shall be allowed to reach the patient, that every thought for him and about him shall be constructive, for every physician, nurse, every attendant, every relative will eventually come to know that thoughts are spiritual things, which are ever seeking manifestation. And that as soon as they find fertile soil, they begin to germinate. Not all thoughts find expression in the objective world and especially in the health and environment of the patient. This is because not all patients are responsive, but when the patient finds that these invisible guests come laden with precious gifts, they will be given a royal welcome. This welcome will be subconscious because the thoughts of others are received subconsciously. The conscious mind receives thought only through the organs of perception, which are its method of contact with the objective world, which are the five senses: seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, and smelling. Subconscious thought is received by any organ of the body affected, and think of the mechanism which has been provided and which can and does objectify the thought received. First, the millions of cell chemists ready and waiting to carry out all instructions received. Next, the complete system of communication, consisting of the vast sympathetic nervous system reaching every fiber of the being and ready to respond to the slightest emotion of joy or fear, of hope or despair, of courage or impotence. Next, the complete manufacturing plant consisting of a series of glands wherein are manufactured all the secretions necessary for the use of the chemists in carrying out the instructions that have been given. Then there is the complete digestive trait wherein food, water, and air are converted into blood, bone, skin, hair, and nails. Then there is the supply department that constantly sends a supply of oxygen, nitrogen, and ether into every part of the being, and the wonder of it all is that this ether holds in solution everything necessary for the use of the chemist, for the ether holds in pure form, and food, water, and air in the secondary form, every element necessary for the use of the chemist in the production of a perfect man. Why, then, do not these chemists produce a perfect specimen of manhood? The reply is simple: the prescriptions that consist of thoughts received by the subconscious call for nothing of the kind. In fact, they usually call for exactly the reverse. The subconscious is also provided with complete equipment for the elimination of waste and useless material as well as a complete repair department. In addition to this, there is a complete system of wireless whereby it is connected with every other subconscious entity in existence. We are not usually conscious of the operation of this wireless, but the same thing is true concerning the operation of the Marconi system. There may be messages of all kinds all about us, but unless we make use of an amplifier, we receive no message, and so with our subconscious wireless. Unless we try to coordinate the conscious and the subconscious, we fail to realize that the subconscious is constantly receiving messages of some kind and just as constantly objectifying the messages in our life and environment. This, then, is the mechanism devised and planned by the Creator himself, and it has been placed under the supervision of the subconscious instead of the conscious mind, but let us not forget that the subconscious mind with all of its wonderful mechanism can be controlled and dominated by the conscious mind when it becomes attuned to the universal mind, where all that is or ever was or ever shall be is held in solution waiting to come forth and manifest in form. Chapter 16, Biochemistry. This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow, as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man. Biochemistry is a science whose concern is with vital processes and which has availed itself of the cell theory and of the principle of the infinite divisibility of matter. It also makes use of the homeopathic dose. The dose must be proportionate to the patient, the cell, for, as Virchow has pointed out, the essence of disease is the cell, changed pathogenically. Dr. Schussler, the originator of biochemistry, arrived at his conclusions by studying the elements, nature, and functions of human blood. The cells receive their substance, their life supply, from the blood and lymph, which, in their turn, derive their supply from the elements taken in as food. Normalcy in the supply of these elements means health, any deviation, a disturbance of health. Dr. Schussler placed the number of mineral combinations in the human body at 12. In the last edition, 1895, he reduced the number to 11. These all necessary cell salts are potassium chloride, potassium phosphate, potassium sulfate, sodium chloride, sodium phosphate, sodium sulfate, phosphate of lime, fluoride of lime, phosphate of magnesia, phosphate of iron silica. Milk contains all these elements, other foods can give them in combination. Cremation reduces the body to these elements. Each kind of cell depends upon a different salt or combination of salts, for its food. A lack of any of these salts is shown by certain symptoms. The proper tissue salts in right proportions are given to remove the symptoms, since a removal of the symptoms implies a removal of the need, or disease, in the cell. It must be remembered, however, that the cells are not fed, they feed themselves, and any attempt to compel them to accept more than they require causes disaster. They voluntarily accept what is necessary and they reject what they do not need. The difference in the cells consists in the kind and quality of the inorganic tissue salts of which they are composed. Health, therefore, requires the requisite quantity of cell salts, and a lack of some one of these organic tissue salts results in imperfect cell action and diseased tissue. The controlling principle that underlies every manifestation of form may be epitomized as follows: in the apportionment and grouping of the elements that constitute a thing lies the cause, not only of the form, but also of its functions and qualities. Dr. Charles W. Littlefield, M.D., the author of the Beginning the Way of Life, gives some very beautiful illustrations of the application of this law in the chapter on the elements and compounds of nature, in which he says, within the scope and application of this principle of grouping electrons, as the law of origin of elements, molecules, tissues, organs, and forms, will be found a practical solution to every problem in biology, from the origin and differentiation of species to every modification of form and configuration of outline that mark individuals with characteristic personalities, both physical and mental. It is well known in chemistry that the molecule is the smallest part of any substance that can exist separately and still retain its properties. Since the nature of the molecule is determined by the polarities, number, and arrangement of the electrons that compose it, and since all structures in the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdom are molecular, it follows that in the last analysis the grouping and apportionment of negative and positive electrons in the molecule determine in turn the nature and physical conditions of the form, whether it be perfect or imperfect. Deformity, personal likes and dislikes, are only questions of being electronically balanced or unbalanced, through supply or lack of supply of the forms of molecules that compose the organism. Only the spirit, mind image of man, however, can make this grouping of molecules for the perfecting of a human form. To bring humanity to a state of primitive perfection, therefore, not only must the same material, prepared in the same manner, be supplied, but the environment of forces must be the same as those employed by the creative spirit in the beginning. Since then, we are able to trace every elemental form of matter back to some definite grouping of negative and positive electrons, that is, through varying numbers and arrangement of these, and since we find life manifesting through various forms as determined by different molecular groupings by law of composition, and since it is rational to place divine mind behind this physical process, we are justified in assuming that divine mind images of living things preceded their physical development. Therefore, in the ultimate science of being, idealism is more probable than materialism. But, while mind may thus exist alone there in the realm of cause, here in the realm of phenomena we always have a psychophysical parallelism, or realism, where everything must be explained by mind and matter, but by neither alone. While the spiritual entity which constitutes the real self may well be assumed to be akin to the supreme mind, being a particular mind image thereof in the line of descent, having power of choice and therefore of independent action, it is unquestionably limited, like that of the player by his instrument, by bodily conditions. In The Chemistry of Life, Dr. George W. Carey says, so-called disease is neither a person, place, nor thing. The symptoms of sensation, called disease, are the results of lacking material, a deficiency in the dynamic molecules that carry on the orderly procedure of life. The effect of the deficiency causes unpleasant sensations, pains, exudations, swellings, or overheated tissue caused by increased motion of blood. The increased motion is the effort nature, or chemical law, makes to restore equilibrium with the diminished molecules of blood builders. By the law of the conservation of energy, the increased motion is changed to heat. We call this effect fever. Biochemistry means the chemistry of life, or the union of inorganic and organic substances whereby new compounds are formed. In its relation to so-called disease, this system uses the inorganic salts, known as cell salts or tissue builders. The constituent parts of man's body are perfect principles, namely oxygen, hydrogen, carbon, lime, iron, potash, soda, silica, magnesia, etc. These elements, gases, etc. are perfect per se, but may be endlessly diversified in combination as may the planks, bricks, or stones with which a building is to be erected. Symptoms, called disease, disappear or cease to manifest when the food called for is furnished. The human body is a receptacle for a storage battery and will always run right while the chemicals are present in proper quantity and combination, as surely as an automobile will run when charged and supplied with the necessary ingredients to vibrate or cause motion. The cell salts are found in all our food and are thus carried into the blood, where they carry on the process of life, and by the law of chemical affinity keep the human form, bodily functions, materialized. When a deficiency occurs in any of these workers through a non-assimilation of food, poor action of liver or digestive processes, dematerialization of the body commences. So, disease is a deficiency in some of the chemical constituents that carry on the chemistry of life. Biochemists have shown that food does not form blood, but simply furnishes the mineral base by setting free the inorganic or cell salts contained in all foodstuff. The organic part, oil, fibrin, albumin, etc. contained in food is burned or digested in the stomach and intestinal tract to furnish motive power to operate the human machine and draw air into lungs, thence into arteries, i.e., air carries. Therefore, it is clearly proven that air unites with the minerals and forms blood, proving that the oil, albumin, etc., found in blood, is created with every breath. Increase the rate of activity of the brain cells by supplying more of the dynamic molecules of the blood known as mineral or cell salts of lime, potash, sodium, iron, magnesia, silica, and we see mentally, truths that we could not sense at lower or natural rates of motion, though the lower rate may manifest ordinary health. Natural man, or natural things, must be raised from the level of nature to supernatural, in order to realize new concepts that lie waiting for recognition. By this regenerative process, millions of dormant cells of the brain are resurrected and set in operation, and then man no longer sees through a glass darkly, but with the eye of spiritual understanding. Ties shown in life's puzzles and sorrowing, ties taught by remorse with its secret stings, that he who grief to another brings, one day, in his turn, must weep. From the past doth the present eternally spring? You may sow what you will, but tomorrow will bring you the harvest, to show you the manner of thing, is the seed you have chosen to sow. John Burroughs. Chapter 17, The New Psychology. The stars come nightly to the sky, the tidal wave comes to the sea, nor time, nor space, nor deep, nor high, can keep my own away from me. John Burroughs. The observation and analysis, knowledge and classification of the activities of the personal consciousness, consisting of the science of psychology, has been studied in colleges and universities for many years, but this personal or conscious self-conscious mind does not by any means constitute the whole of the mind. There are some very highly complex and very orderly activities going on within the body of an infant. The body of the infant, as such, cannot induce or carry on those activities, and the conscious mind of the infant does not know enough to even plan them or be aware of them. Probably also in most cases, there is no one around the infant who even remotely understands what is going on in this highly complex process of physical life, and yet all those activities manifest intelligence, and intelligence of a very complex and high order. From the examination of what goes on in the human body, from all the complex processes, the beating of heart and digestion of food, the secretion and excretion of the glands, it is apparent that there is in control an order of mentality that has a higher degree of intelligence, but it is the mentality which is operating in the millions of cells that constitute the body, and so operate below the surface of what we term consciousness. It is therefore subconscious. The subconscious mind, again, assumes two phases. Connected with each human person there is a subconsciousness which may in some sense be regarded as the subconsciousness of that person, but which merges at a still deeper level into what may be termed universal subconsciousness, or into cosmic consciousness. That may be illustrated in this way, if you will think of the waves on the surface of a lake, insofar as they are above the level of the troughs, as standing for so many personal mentalities, and then, if you will think of a small body of water not rising above the surface, but in some degree running along with each wave and merging indistinctly at the bottom into the great unmoved mass below, which may be thought of as the deepest level, then those three levels of the water in the lake may illustrate to you personal consciousness or self-consciousness, personal subconsciousness, and universal subconsciousness or cosmic consciousness. Now, out of cosmic consciousness springs personal subconsciousness, and out of that on turn, or in connection with it, rises personal consciousness. At the beginning of the experience of the child, its government is almost wholly from subconsciousness, but as it goes on, it becomes aware maybe unconsciously, but still in a degree aware of the presence of laws of consciousness which manifest as justice, truthfulness, honesty, purity, liberty, loving-kindness, and so on, and begins to relate itself to them and to be governed by them more and more. The first thing to note is that while this mental action is going on continuously, we are normally quite unconscious of it. For this reason, it is known as the subconscious department of the mind to distinguish it from the part which functions through the senses of which we are conscious, and which we call the self-conscious. The existence in the body of two distinct nervous systems, the cerebrospinal and the sympathetic, each with its own field of operation and its special functions, prepared us for these two mental departments. The cerebrospinal system is used by the self-conscious and the sympathetic by the subconscious. And just as we find in the body that, while the functions and activities of the two nervous systems are different, provision has been made for very close interaction between the two, so we will find that, while the functions and activities of the two mental departments are different, there is a very definite line of activity between them. The main business of the subconscious mind is to preserve the life and health of the individual. Consequently, it supervises all the automatic functions, such as circulation of the blood, the digestion, all automatic muscular action, and so on. It transforms food into suitable material for body building, returning it to conscious man in the form of energy. Conscious man makes use of this energy in mental and physical work, and in the process uses up what has been provided for him by his subconscious intelligence. The action of the subconscious is cumulative and may be illustrated in the following manner. Suppose you take a tub of water and begin to stir it with a small piece of wood from right to left with a circular motion. At first, you will start only a ripple around the wood, but if you keep the wood in motion with the circular movement, the water will gradually accumulate the strength that you are putting into the wood, and presently you will have the whole tub of water in a whirl. If you were then to drop the piece of wood, the water would carry along the instrument that originally set it in motion, and if you were suddenly to stop the wood while it is still projecting in the water, there would be a strong tendency to not only carry the wood forward, but to take your hand along with it. Now, suppose that after you have the water whirling, you decide that you do not want it to whirl, or you think that you would prefer to have it whirl in the other direction, and so try to get it going the other way. You will find that there is great resistance, and you will find that it will take a long while to bring the water to a standstill, and a still longer time before you get it going the other way. This will illustrate that whatever the conscious mind does repeatedly, the subconscious will accumulate as a habit. Any experience that the subconscious receives is stirred up, and if you give it another one of the same kind, it will add that to the former one, and so keep on accumulating them indefinitely, the tendency being to accumulate activity along any definite line in increasing measure, and this holds true concerning any phase of activity that comes within range of human consciousness. This is true whether the experiences are for our benefit or otherwise, whether the experiences are good or evil. The subconscious is a spiritual activity, and spirit is creative. The subconscious, therefore, creates the habits, condition, and environment that the conscious mind continues to entertain. If we consciously entertain thoughts associated with art, music, and the aesthetic realm, if we consciously entertain thoughts associated with the good, the true, and the beautiful, then, we shall find these thoughts taking root in the subconsciousness, and our experiences and environment will be a reflection of the thought which the conscious mind has entertained. If, however, we entertain thoughts of hatred, jealousy, envy, hypocrisy, disease, lack or limitation of any kind, then we shall find our experience and environment will reflect the conditions in accordance with these thoughts. As we sow, so shall we reap. The law is no respecter of persons. We may think what we will, but the result of our thoughts is governed by an immutable law. There is nothing good or evil, but thinking makes it so. We cannot plant seed of one kind and reap fruit of another. Consciousness consists in the power to think, to will, and to choose. Self-consciousness is the power to be aware of the self as a thinking, knowing, willing, and choosing individual. The brain is the organ of the conscious mind, and the cerebrospinal nervous system is the system of nerves by which it is connected with all parts of the body. The process of growth is a subconscious process. We do not carry on the vital processes of nature consciously. All the complex processes of nature, the beating of the heart, the digestion of food, the secretion of the glands, require a high degree of mentality and intelligence. The personal consciousness or mind would not be capable of handling these intricate problems. They are, therefore, controlled by the universal mind, which in the individual we call the subconscious. The universal mind is sometimes referred to as the superconscious, and sometimes the divine mind. The subconscious is sometimes called the subjective and the conscious the objective mind, but remember that words are simply the vessels in which thought is carried. If you get the thought, you will not be concerned about the terms. Mind is a spiritual activity and spirit is creative, hence the subconscious mind not only controls all the vital functions and processes of growth, but is the seat of memory and habit. The sympathetic nervous system is the instrument by which the subconscious keeps in touch with the feeling or emotions, thus the subconscious reacts to the emotions, never to the reason, as the emotions are much stronger than the reason or intellect. The individual will therefore frequently act in exactly the opposite manner from what the reason and intellect would dictate. It is axiomatic that two things cannot occupy the same space at the same time. What is true of things is true of thoughts. If, therefore, any thought seeks entrance to the mental realm which is destructive in its nature, it should be quickly displaced by a thought that has a constructive tendency. Herein lays the value of a ready-made affirmation, such as the affirmation. Day by day, in every way, I am growing better and better. Or the Andrews affirmation. I am whole, strong, powerful, loving, harmonious, and happy. These or similar affirmations may be committed to memory and repeated until they become automatic or subconscious. As physical conditions are but the outward manifestations of mental conditions, it will readily be seen that by constantly holding the thought expressed in the affirmation in the mind, that it will be but a comparatively short time until conditions and environment begin to change so as to be in accordance with the new method of thinking. This same principle can be brought into operation in a negative way, though, through the process of denial. Many make use of this with excellent results. The conscious and subconscious are but two phases of action in connection with the mind. The relation of the subconscious to the conscious is quite analogous to that existing between a weather vane and the atmosphere. Just as the least pressure of the atmosphere causes an action on the part of the weather vane, so does the least thought entertained by the conscious mind produce within the subconscious mind action in exact proportion to the depth of feeling characterizing the thought and the intensity with which the thought is indulged. It follows that if you deny unsatisfactory conditions, you are withdrawing the creative power of your thought from these conditions. You are cutting them away at the root. You are sapping their vitality. The law of growth necessarily governs every manifestation in the objective, so that a denial of unsatisfactory conditions will not bring about instant change. A plant will remain visible for some time after its roots have been cut, but it will gradually fade away and eventually disappear, so the withdrawal of your thought from the contemplation of unsatisfactory conditions will gradually but surely terminate these conditions. This is exactly an opposite course from the one that we would normally be inclined to adopt. It will therefore have an exact opposite effect to the one usually secured. Most persons concentrate upon unsatisfactory conditions, thereby giving the condition that measure of energy and vitality that is necessary in order to supply a vigorous growth. The possibilities of thought training are infinite, its consequence eternal, and yet few take the pains to direct their thinking into channels that will do them good, but instead leave all to chance, or, rather, to the myriad of circumstances that buffet and compel our mental action if counter-effort is not made. Martin. Chapter 18, Suggestion. All truly wise thoughts have been thought already thousands of times, but to make them truly ours we must think of them honestly, till they take root in our personal experience. Goethe. At about the time that I struck bottom, there came to my notice some literature telling of the power of directed thought, and I became interested in the study of that, and also in some inspirational literature which later came to my notice. I was rather skeptical at first, but as I read and thought and commenced to look for proof in the events of our daily lives and in our environment, the truth commenced to dawn upon me. I began to see and know that life manifestations were fed from within and grew from within, and if the within be in a state of decay, it invariably showed without. In fact, I know now that the man of Galilee said something when he said, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." If he thinks himself a slave to tobacco or other obnoxious habits, so is he. He must think himself free to remain free, once he has gained freedom. But to think one's self away from a habit that clings as close as thought itself is a hard matter unaided. At the time we tried suggestion for the elimination of my tobacco habit, I slept in one bedroom with one of the children and my wife slept in another bedroom with our then youngest boy, about 8 months old. As often is the case, she had to be up at times during the night to wait on the baby, and it was at those times that she gave me mental treatments while I was asleep. It isn't necessary to be in the same room, though it is all right if it happens to be the case. While I was sleeping, she would visualize herself or mentally project herself as though she was standing or kneeling beside my bed and speaking to me. Her suggestions were of a constructive and positive nature rather than of negative. It went something like this: "You are now desiring freedom from the tobacco habit, you are free and desire and enjoy mastery more than indulgence. Tomorrow you will want only about half the normal amount of tobacco and each day it will be less until you are free within a week and shall never have any more craving for tobacco. You are master and free." She made the above suggestion, in substance, to me each time that she was awake during the night, and I do pledge on oath that within 6 days from the time she started treatment, I had completely quit craving tobacco and quit using it. That has been several months ago, and today I am more master of my habits of thought and word and deed than ever before in my life. I have changed from an underweight, nervous wreck to a full weight, healthful, strong, energetic, and clear-thinking man, and everyone who knew me remarks how differently I look and act and seem. Since that time, I have followed the study and the practice of constructive and directed thinking. You know that in wireless telegraphy or telephony they use an instrument called the tuning coil that vibrates in harmony with an electrical wave or vibration of a certain length. It is in tune with that particular tune of wave, and consequently they are in harmony and allow the vibration to go on to the other receiving instrument unhindered. Yet there may be other wireless vibrations of a higher or lower tune or key passing at the same time, yet only those in harmony are registered by the receiver. Now, our minds are just about the same way, only we regulate our tuning coil by our mind. We can tune our minds to low vibration thoughts such as the animal impulses of nature, or we can tune them to thoughts of an educational or mental nature, or we can, after some qualifications are met, tune ourselves to receive purely spiritual thought vibrations. This power constitutes the divine power that is given to man. Of course you will readily see that there never was a primitive hut or modern mansion built without the application of this principle of directed constructive thinking and visualization. The backbone of salesmanship of all kinds is the understanding and skillful use of suggestion. When cleverly used, it tends to relax one's conscious attention and warm up and quicken the desire until a favorable response is gained. Window displays and counter displays as well as illustrated advertising all rely on the power to drive a suggestion in the very center of desire, where it grows to the point of action if in harmony with the thought vibration of the desire. If the desire does not recognize or is not in harmony with the suggestion, it is as seed that has fallen upon stony ground, and is without harvest of action. Thought and action do produce material results, as is easily verified in the builder and his plans, the dressmaker and her patterns, or the school and its product, all in harmony with the leading constructive thought. The quality of thought determines the measure of success in life. Charles Haanel, The New Psychology. Chapter 19, Psychoanalysis. He has achieved success who has lived well, laughed often, and loved much, who has gained the trust of pure women and the love of little children, who has filled his niche and accomplished his tasks, who has left the world better than he found it, who has never lacked appreciation of earth's beauties or failed to express it, who has always looked for the best in others and given the best he had, whose life was an inspiration, whose memory a benediction. B. A. Stanley. Canst thou not minister to a mind diseased? Asked Macbeth of the doctor, but the passage is so strikingly fitting, so prophetically explanatory of psychoanalysis, that it must be given in full. Macbeth. Canst thou not minister to a mind diseased, pluck from the memory a rooted sorrow, raise out the written troubles of the brain, and with some sweet oblivious antidote cleanse the stuffed bosom of that perilous stuff which weighs upon the heart? Doctor. Therein the patient must minister to himself. There is hardly a person today exempt from some form of phobia, or fear, whose origin may date so far back as to be lost among the shadows of childhood. Hardly a person is free from some aversion, or complex, whose effects are a matter of daily occurrence, despite the will of the victim. In a sense, the subconsciousness has never forgotten the incident and still harbors the unpleasant memory of it. The consciousness, however, in an attempt to protect our dignity or vanity, whichever you prefer, may evolve some apparent, better reason than the original one. Thus, complexes are formed. Brontophobia, or fear of thunder, was brought about in the case of one patient by hearing a cannon go off very near her when she was a child, a fact that had been forgotten for years. To confess to such a fear, even to one's self, would have been childish and fear to the somewhat more dignified cause of thunder. Needless to say, it is such disguises of the memories that make difficult the labor of the psychoanalyst to pluck from the memory a rooted sorrow, to raise out the written troubles of the brain, its traumas, or the original shocks. And when we remember that psyche in Greek means not only the mind but the soul, we can better understand Shakespeare's amazing grasp of psychology when he speaks not only of the mind diseased, but of that perilous stuff which weighs upon the heart. We all have these complexes, in forms ranging from the mild to the severe: cytophobia, the aversion to certain foods; claustrophobia, the fear of locked doors to which the fear of open spaces forms a striking contrast; stage fright, touching wood and other superstitions. A thorough list would indeed be a very long one. For the greater part, the patient must minister to himself with the help of the skilled psychoanalyst. In some cases, elaborate processes are needed, and the use of psychometers and other delicate registering devices enlisted, but usually, the procedure is a simple one. The subject of investigation is made comfortable physically and put in a quiet mood. He is then told to utter whatever may come into his mind in connection with his complex, with occasional promptings and questions from the psychoanalyst. Sooner or later the association of ideas will bring to the surface the original cause or experience that had become rooted or submerged. Very often, the mere explanation will suffice to eradicate the obsession. But there is another group of disorders, hysteria, which may partake both of the physical and the psychical, or where either state may induce the other. Richard Inglis in his History and Power of Mind has summed up the matter very clearly. Disease may be divided into two classes, the imaginary and the real. Imaginary disease is a picture held firmly by the objective mind, which causes more or less physical correspondence. This kind of disease is often created in total disregard of the laws governing anatomy or physiology, and is the hardest to cure, because persons possessed of it hold to it so persistently that an entire revision of their mode of thought must be made before it can be cured. It is not at all infrequent to have a patient complain of kidney disease, locating the pain and the organ several inches below the waistline. The spleen is often supposed to be in the right side of the body, and phantom tumors appear and disappear. But all these mental pictures, if held long enough, create matrices or vortices, and draw into them the elements that will bring finally the actual disease that was at first purely imaginary. Psychoanalysis proceeds upon the assumption that a very large number of cases of disease are caused by repression of normal desires, or by disturbances that have occurred in the past life of the individual. In such cases, the root of the disease is so concealed, sometimes through years and years, that it must be searched for. The psychoanalyst is enabled to locate such difficulties through dreams, or rather through the interpretation of dreams, or by questioning the patient concerning his past life. The well-trained analyst must of necessity secure the friendly confidence of the patient to such an extent that the latter will not hesitate to reveal any experience, no matter how intimate. As soon as the patient has been led to remember a particular experience, he is encouraged to talk about it in detail, and thus it is brought up from subconsciousness. The analyst then shows him what has been causing the difficulty, and when the cause is eradicated it can do no more harm. It is exactly parallel to a foreign substance in the flesh. There is a horrible swelling with inflammation, pain, and suffering. The surgeon is called, he removes the difficulty and nature does the rest. The psychological law follows the same procedure. If there has been any abnormal activity, any festering sore in the subconscious mind going on for years and years, if it can be located by a process of mental analysis and put out of the mental complex and shown to the patient, the catharsis is complete. Dr. Hugh T. Patrick, clinical professor of nerves and mental disease in Northwestern University Medical School, mentions several interesting cases. In many cases of functional nervous disorders, the factor of fear is quite obvious. But in many cases, though equally important, it is not at once apparent. Of the latter, there are numerous varieties which may be divided into groups. One group embraces patients known to have physical courage. A few years ago, there was referred to me one of the most noted as well as fearless men in the ring, a man who was particularly carefree, if not careless. He was suffering with what were considered rather vague and baffling nervous symptoms, principally insomnia, lack of interest, and moodiness. A careful analysis soon revealed that some trifling symptoms, due to high living and domestic friction, had served to put the idea into his head that he was losing his mind. This phobia was sickness, and the fear so possessed his soul that he was good for nothing until he got rid of it. Needless to say, the patient himself was quite unconscious of the nature of his trouble, and his physician had overlooked it. So they could not cure the trouble from a physical standpoint. The situation had to be mentally analyzed, and the cause of the fear dragged out from subconsciousness and exposed to the man. When he had a look at it, it had exactly the same effect as pulling an eyelash out from an inflamed eye and letting you see it. Your troubles are all over right away, because you are very sure the disturbing cause has been removed, and you forget about it then. A sheep rancher of Wyoming complained of insomnia, loss of appetite, abdominal distress, general nervousness, and inability to look after his ranch. What really was the matter with him was fear of cancer of the stomach. This phobia completely unnerved him and caused him to enormously magnify every bodily sensation. But was he a nerveless coward? Decidedly not. There was a time when the cattlemen of the far west made sheep raising a hazardous occupation. Through these dangerous years, he lived without a tremor, though he never went to sleep without a rifle by his side. Once, he was informed that 3 cattlemen had started out to get him, and the information was correct. He mounted his horse and, properly armed, rode out to meet them. As he expressed it, he talked them out of it, and the 3 would-be assassins turned and rode away. In this encounter he was not in the least apprehensive or uncomfortable, and I learned of the incident only in a conversation about his business. He had plenty of physical courage, but when some thing in the inner organism seemed to be wrong, he was scared. As soon as this doctor discovered what the fear was, he probably produced an X-ray or something of that nature to show the patient that there was nothing the matter. Then, drawing the patient's attention to the groundless fear, the doctor was able to convince the patient of the groundlessness of his fears. A policeman, 49 years old, suffered from intractable insomnia, head pressure, general nervousness, and loss of weight. He was not a man to suspect of fear. For many years he had been in active service in one of the worst precincts of Chicago, and on account of his familiarity with criminals was frequently sent after the worst types. He had been in numerous gun fights. Once, a notorious gunman standing beside him fired point-blank at his head. All this disturbed his equanimity not a whit. And yet his illness was the result of fear pure and simple. It came about in this way: a malicious person had preferred against him charges of misconduct and he was cited to appear before the trial board. This worried him greatly. Innocent, he keenly felt the disgrace of the accusation and feared that he might be suspended or even discharged. He trembled for his well-earned good name and for his home, on which there was a mortgage. Naturally, he began to sleep poorly, to have queer feelings in his head, and then to feel uncertain of himself. At this juncture, some friend sympathetically told him that one could go insane from worry. These were the steps: fear of disgrace, fear of financial collapse, fear of insanity. But did the patient know all this? Not he. He knew only that he was nervous and that he suffered and that he did not feel sure of himself. When that was dragged out of his consciousness and shown to him as a root of his trouble and a physician was able to assure him that fear was all in the world that was the matter with him, he made up his mind that he had better give that up. Then he was healed. The subconscious mentality is sick in a chronic way. It has been made sick by some kind of mental experience usually of many years standing, and the sickness is a result of its continuing to cherish that experience and keeping it before itself. This constitutes what is technically called a running sore in the subconscious, that is, mentally not physically. A woman had suffered from general debility for a number of years and had been unable to secure relief. The psychologist began to probe to see what the trouble was. He began to pronounce words, just anything that came into his thoughts: desk, book, rug, Chinaman. When he pronounced the word Chinaman, the woman appeared startled. He then asked her what the word Chinaman suggested to her and why it startled her. The woman said that when she was a little girl, she and a playmate used to play around a Chinese laundry and that they used to plague the Chinaman by throwing pebbles at him through the open door. One day the Chinaman chased them with a big knife and they were nearly scared to death. "Yes," said the psychologist, "that is one of the things that I wanted to know." Then he began to pronounce more words, presently the word water, and again the woman was startled. It developed then that one time when she was a very little girl, she and her brother were playing on the wharf and that accidentally she pushed him into the water and he was drowned. She said it was many years ago, when she was a mere child. The psychologist asked, "Do you think of these things very often?" She said, "No, I do not know that I have thought of them before in 15 or 20 years. Well," he said, "I will tell you what I want you to do." She was at that time in a sanitarium under the care of a nurse. "I want you to tell the nurse every day that experience about the Chinaman and also the experience about your brother, and I want you to keep telling it until you have told it so many times that you do not feel bad about it anymore. Then, see me again in 2 or 3 weeks." She did as he directed, and at the end of 60 days she was well. The effect of telling it so often was its becoming commonplace to the conscious mentality, without touch, the feelings. So the suggestion then went down to the subconsciousness that it did not feel badly about the incident anymore, and the conditions of fear which had persisted for 20 or 25 years were erased, and the complex in the subconsciousness was no longer in evidence. The subconscious mind has perfect memory and is fully equipped at birth. Every child inherits certain characteristics from its ancestors. These are carried in the subconscious mind and brought into play when the life or health of the individual requires them. It is natural to be born without pain, to develop without pain, to live without pain, and to die without pain. This is as natural as it is for a tree to blossom and bear fruit, which at the proper time drops off without distress. The subconscious will take care of every situation even when it is interfered with. It has a remedy available for every situation. Again, you forget something, but the subconscious mind has not forgotten. As soon as the conscious mind dismisses the matter, it comes to us. Every engineer knows what it is to sleep over a problem. While he is asleep, the subconscious is working it out. Or he may lose an article, get excited and anxious about it, and not be able to find it, but as soon as the conscious mind gives it up and lets go, the sense of where it is comes without effort. Again, there is a difficult situation in your affairs. If you can only persuade your conscious mind to let go, to cease its anxiety, dismiss its fear, to give up the tenseness and struggle, then the subconscious will ordinarily bring about prosperity. The tendency of the subconscious is always toward health and harmonious conditions. To illustrate, you are in the water over your depth, you cannot swim, and you are sinking. If at the moment the lifeguard approaches you, grab him around the neck and impede the actions of his arms and limbs, he may be unable to do anything with you, but if you will simply trust yourself in his hands, and then he will get you out. And so it is absolutely certain that the subconscious mind will be present in every difficult situation, and that it will tend to play lifeguard in your favor if you can but persuade your consciousness to cease its anxiety, to dismiss its fears, and to give up the tenseness of the struggle. Suppose the conscious mind suffers itself to become angry over every trifle. Every time it gets angry, the impulse is transferred to the subconscious. The impulse is repeated again and again each time it is stirred up. The second record of anger is added to the first, the third to the second, and the fourth to the third. Soon the subconscious has acquired the habit, and before long it will be difficult to stop. When this situation develops, the conscious mind will be subject to the irritating influence from without and the habitual impulse from within. There will be action and reaction. It will be easier to be angry and more difficult to prevent it. Yet every time the conscious mind gets angry, an additional impulse will be given to the subconscious, and that impulse will be an additional incentive to get angry again. Now then, anger is an abnormal condition, and any abnormal condition contains within itself the penalty, and this penalty will be promptly reflected in that part of the body that has the least resistance. For instance, if the person has a weak stomach, there will be acute attacks of indigestion, and eventually these will become chronic. In other persons, Bright's disease may develop, in another rheumatism, and so on. It is evident, therefore, that these conditions are effects, but if the cause be removed, the effects will vanish. If the individual knows that thoughts are causes and conditions are effects, he will promptly decide to control his thoughts. This will tend to erase anger and other bad mental habits, and as the light of truth gradually becomes clear and perfect, the habit and everything connected with it will be erased and the accumulated distress destroyed. What is true of anger is true of jealousy, of fear, of lust, of greed, and of dishonesty. Each of these may become subconscious, and each of them may eventually result in some diseased condition of the body, and the nature of the disease indicates to the trained analyst the nature of the cause that was responsible for the condition. Frederick Pierce tells us in Our Unconscious Mind. It is a matter of common observation that everyone is in greater or less degree suggestible. The reaction to suggestion may be either positive or negative, either an acceptance or heightened resistance. In this we see a censorship. An epidemic of a certain type of crime shows, on the part of the perpetrators, imitative response to suggestion implanted both by the elaborate descriptive accounts in the newspapers and by the great amount of discussion of the outrages heard on all sides. Primitive effects of great intensity are aroused, they break through the primary cultural censorship, which is weak in the criminally disposed person, they accumulate energy by being dwelt on in consciousness, and finally become sufficiently strong to surmount all fear of punishment and to control the conduct. The remainder of the social group, having a higher cultural censorship, reacts to the same suggestion negatively and discharges the energy of whatever primitive effects have been aroused in the form of wrath and the desire for punishment of the criminals. In this connection, it is interesting to note that one often hears the desire for vengeance expressed in terms of much greater primitive violence than the crime itself actually showed. Psychoanalysts hold that this is a method by which the individual is reinforcing his own none too strong censorship of his unconscious. Chapter 20, Metaphysics. Creation consists in the art of combining forces that have an affinity for each other in the proper proportion. Thus, oxygen and hydrogen combined in the proper proportions produce water. Oxygen and hydrogen are both invisible gases, but water is not invisible. Germs, however, have life, they must therefore be the product of something that has life or intelligence. Spirit is the only creative principle in the universe, and thought is the only activity that spirit possesses. Therefore, germs must be the result of a mental process. A thought goes forth from the thinker, it meets other thoughts for which it has an affinity, they coalesce and form a nucleus for other similar thoughts, this nucleus sends out calls into the formless energy wherein all thoughts and all things are held in solution, and soon the thought is clothed in a form in accordance with the character given to it by the thinker. 1,000,000 men in the agony of death and torture on the battlefield send out thoughts of hatred and distress. Soon another 1,000,000 men die from the effect of a microbe called the influenza germ. None but the experienced metaphysician knows when and how the deadly germ came into existence. As there are an infinite variety of thoughts, so there are an infinite variety of germs, constructive as well as destructive, but neither the constructive nor the destructive germ will germinate and flourish until it finds congenial soil in which to take root. All thoughts and all things are held in solution in the universal mind. The individual may open his mental gates and thereby become receptive to thoughts of any kind or description. If he thinks that there are magicians, witches, or wizards who are desirous of injuring him, he is thereby opening the door for the entrance of such thoughts, and he will be able to say with Job, "The things I feared have come upon me." If, on the contrary, he thinks that there are those who are desirous of helping him, he thereby opens the door for such help, and he will find that, as thy faith is, so be it unto thee, is as true today as it was 2,000 years ago. Tolstoy said, "Ever more and more clearly does the voice of reason become audible to man." Formerly men said, "Do not think, but believe. Reason will deceive you, faith alone will open to you the true happiness of life." And man tried to believe, but his relations with other people soon showed him that other men believed in something entirely different, so that soon it became inevitable that he must decide which faith out of many he would believe. Reason alone cannot decide this. Attempts in our day to instill spiritual matters into man by faith, while ignoring his reason, are precisely the same as attempts to feed a man and ignore his mouth. Men's common nature has proven to them that they all have a common knowledge, and men will never more return to their former errors. The voice of the people is the voice of God. It is impossible to drown that voice, because that voice is not the single voice of any one person, but the voice of all rational consciousness of mankind, which is expressed in every separate man. Reason tells man that the universe is a cosmos and is therefore governed by law, so that when we see that some persons secure extraordinary results by mental or spiritual methods, reason tells us that we can all do exactly the same thing because the law is no respecter of persons, and that this is being done every day all the time, everywhere, is apparent to everyone who has taken the trouble to ascertain the facts. All manifestations are governed by principles that we recognize as universal laws, and in the manifestation of those laws we recognize system, order, and harmony. If the infinite is omnipresent, it must encompass and interfiltrate all that seems to be matter and be one with it and inseparable from it. Science teaches that so-called matter exists in a diversity of grades from its crudest visible form to the most refined and invisible state in an inseparable relationship with spirit, from which it can never be disassociated. The latent, or electric, power in the gaseous condition of the elements acts through vibration upon all matter in the combinations lower than the gases by induction, raising them also to a fluidic or gaseous condition and enabling them to form new combinations on a higher plane. By the same principle is the mineral raised to the sphere of electricity, magnetism, or light, which of themselves are nothing more than ether in different velocities of vibration. Radioactivity consists in setting in motion certain electric vibrations, which after passing through the ether, record themselves on a distant receiver. The whole system depends on the intangible substance known as ether. It is a substance invisible, colorless, odorless, and inconceivably rarefied that fills all space. It fills the space between the earth and the sun and the stars, and it also fills the minute space between the atoms of the densest substance, such as steel. Even when electricity passes through a wire, it is merely a vibration of the ether that circulates between the atoms composing the copper wire. In turn, we have abundant proof of the subjugation of ethereal matter by the still more rarefied sphere of force that we recognize as psychic force or mind force. Matter thus refined becomes the plastic associate of the mind for the transmission of its forces in the manifestation of its power. That mind does transmit its forces through, or by, its vibrations. We have proof of the expression of its power of mind over mind, as in the manifestations of the mind of the hypnotist over his subject through mental suggestion, by which he is enabled to control the entire organism of his subject to such an extent as to suspend the functions of the organs of the body at will. Thus we see that the subtle or refined elements of matter at the disposal of the mind are subject to his control. Matter in itself has no consciousness or feeling and is active only when controlled by spirit or mind in accordance with the laws that govern its action, and when active gives forth the manifestation and power of the spirit, mind, or intelligence behind it and acting upon it, and in its varied manifestations symbolizes the wisdom or intelligence of the mind of man or of the infinite mind itself. As the infinite mind rules and governs the universe, so it is ordained for man to rule and govern his living universe that he has created or evolved, known as the temple of the living God, an abridgment or microcosm of the universe of the infinite. Wisdom is the proper use of knowledge to bring about harmony, happiness, ease, and health. Ignorance is the darkness that the light of truth disperses, which light alone can enable us to understand the priority of mind in the control of matter. The office of metaphysics is to bring man into a true comprehension of his relationship with the world in which he lives, moves, and has his being, and an understanding of how to gain dominion over all that is his rightful heritage. The metaphysician gives the patient nothing that he can see, nothing that he can hear, nothing that he can taste, nothing that he can smell, and nothing that he can feel. It is therefore absolutely impossible for the practitioner to reach the objective brain of the patient in any way whatsoever. It will be said that he may give a mental suggestion, he may send him a thought. This might be possible if it were not for the fact that we do not consciously receive the thoughts of others except through the medium of the senses. Again, admitting that it might be possible to reach the conscious mind without the aid of any material agency, the conscious or objective mind would not receive it because the objective mind is the mind with which we reason, plan, decide, will, and act. The practitioner invariably suggests perfection, and such a thought would be instantly dismissed by the objective mind as contrary to reason and therefore unacceptable, so that no result would be accomplished. The mind that the metaphysician calls into action is the universal, not the individual. Their formula is, divine mind always has met and always will meet every human need. This divine mind is the creative principle of the universe. It is the Father that the Nazarene had in mind when he said, "It is not I that doeth the work, but the Father that dwelleth within me. He doeth the work. It will at once become apparent that this power that the metaphysician utilizes is spiritual, not material, subjective, not objective. For this reason it becomes necessary to reach the subconscious mind instead of the conscious mind. Here then is the secret of the efficacy of the method. The sympathetic nervous system is the organ of the subconscious mind. This system of nerves governs all of the vital processes of the body, the circulation of the blood, the digestion of the food, the building of tissues, the manufacture and distribution of the various secretions. In fact, the sympathetic nervous system reaches every part of the body. All vital processes are carried on subconsciously. They seem to have been purposely taken out of the realm of the conscious and placed under the control of a power that would be subject to no change or caprice. The subjective mind, the subconscious mind, and the divine mind are therefore simply different terms of indicating the one mind in which we live and move and have our being. We contact this mind by will or intention. Mind is omnipresent, we may therefore contact it anywhere and everywhere, neither time nor space require consideration. As spirit is the creative principle of the universe, a subjective realization of this spirituality of man, and his consequent perfection, is taken up by the divine mind and eventually manifested in the life and experiences of the patient. Some will say that this ideal state of perfection is never realized. To be sure, the great teacher anticipated this criticism, for did he not say, "In my Father's house are many mansions," indication that there are many degrees of perfection, that although the law operates with immutable precision, the operator may be uninformed or inexperienced. The ability to throw the thought up and beyond the evidence of the senses into the realm of the uncreated, where all that ever was or ever will be is waiting to be brought forth, to be organized, developed, and crystallized into tangible form, is not the work of the enthusiast who has just come into the knowledge of his spiritual inheritance. It is rather the work of one who has become responsive to the most subtle vibrations, he who can hear the voice of the silence, he who has come into the terrible realization that the oasis he saw as he passed over the desert was but a mirage, and as he approached, it receded, he who is no longer astonished or amazed to find that after all, real power is impersonal, that it may make a super beast of one and a superman of another. A great many do not understand the principle of metaphysics and the method of applying it so as to work intelligently in their own behalf. Under such conditions, they can only expect to rely on someone else, and when that is done continually or at frequent intervals, it tends to weaken rather than strengthen the spiritual factor in consciousness. It is, therefore, desirable and necessary to secure an understanding of the nature of truth. Most persons who have become interested in metaphysics have had some wonderful experience or they know of someone who has had such an experience. It has been declared by philosophers, religionists, and scientists, again and again, that no proof of the existence of the absolute truth is possible. In other words, that the only way in which a man can be convinced of the creative power of truth is by demonstration, or by assuming that truth is all-powerful and then on the basis of this assumption make the demonstration. This is proof, this is freedom, and this is why it has been said, "Ye shall know the truth and the truth shall make you free." Observation of the characteristic manifestations of anything and deductions based upon such observation constitute knowledge of that thing. It will readily be seen, therefore, that if you have observed and have become aware of the fact of certain characteristic manifestations of truth, you will have knowledge. If it should come to pass that you had observed and carefully noted all the characteristic manifestations of truth, and then in addition perceived the uniformities that run through those manifestations, especially if they are complex, and see the laws or system upon which their characteristics are based, and then your knowledge of truth would be complete. Through the mental and spiritual awakening of a century ago, which was responsible for modern progressive thought, certain higher forces and principles were discovered in the mind of man, and in the same way new realms of thought and spiritual reality were opened to consciousness revelations, literally, that gave life a changed and marvelous meaning and that caused the cosmos to extend into infinity, seemingly, in every direction. And therefore a twofold purpose appeared at the very beginning of this movement to know the real man and to know the real cosmos. An ancient desire, but which was reborn at this time, and with so much virility that it has become today a soulful passion in the minds of millions. What, then, are the characteristics of truth? All agree that in the philosophical sense truth is that which is absolute and changeless. Truth must then be a fact. What then is a fact? Well, 3 times 3 equals 9. That is a fact, always was a fact, always will be a fact, there can be no evasion, no argument, no equivocation. It is truth in the United States, in China, in Japan, it is true everywhere, all the time. A fact exists in the nature of things without beginning, without end, without limitation. It governs our actions and our commercial operations. Those who would undertake to disregard it would do so at their peril. It is, however, a fact which you cannot see, you cannot hear, you cannot taste, nor can you smell or feel it, it is not apprehensible to any of the physical senses. Is it therefore any less a fact? It is without color, size, or form, is it for this reason any less true? It is without years, is it for that reason not the same yesterday, today, and forever? You may use this fact as long as you live. Millions of other persons may use it as often as they like. That will not destroy it. Use does not change it, from everlasting to everlasting 3 times 3 equals 9. This is therefore a fact or the truth. Truth is the only possible knowledge that man can possess, because knowledge that is not based upon truth would be false and would therefore not be knowledge at all. Counterfeit money is not true money. It is false, however much it may pass for true. The truth is, therefore, all that anyone can know, for what is not true does not exist, therefore we cannot know it. We all think we know much that is not so, but what is not so does not exist, therefore we cannot know it. Therefore, the truth or absolute knowledge is the only possible knowledge, and any other use of the word is not scientific or exact. The metaphysicians of the East will not give out spiritual knowledge miscellaneously. They will not give it to children or young people except under conditions when they have them directly under control and directly under instruction, as definitely as we have our children under instruction in the intellectual life in our schools. In India, when a young man is to be initiated into things spiritual, a definite 7 years course is provided for him under a master, and he is given first the things that he first ought to know along these lines. He is forewarned with regard to dangers that may arise, and the whole course of his journey is guarded by his master with the greatest care, so as to prevent his stumbling during the early stages. If spiritual metaphysics becomes popular in our Western world, the same things will develop here. People will not take up the most advanced work before becoming acquainted with the simpler forms of knowledge. Attainment implies obligation. If you are somewhere up the ladder of culture, if you have entered the school of understanding, if you have seen the light of spiritual truth, then you are supposed by that very fact to know more than the one who has not yet arrived. Your nervous system will automatically organize itself on a higher plane, and because of this you must live closer to the law of your being or experience suffering more quickly. There are no exceptions to the law. The resurrection from the dead is not a process of getting corpses out of the grave. It is the elevation of mentalities from the plane of the material to the plane of the spiritual. It is crossing the river Jordan and entering the promised land. It is not until one becomes acquainted with the laws governing in the spiritual world that he really begins to live. Consequently, those who are still functioning in the material world are dead, they have not yet been resurrected. Eyes have they but they see not, ears have they but they hear not. Those who have been raised to the spiritual plane find that there are many practices that they must drop. In most cases, these practices leave the individual without difficulty. They drop away of their own accord. But when the individual persists in functioning in the old world, he usually find that a house divided against itself cannot stand, and he frequently must suffer severely before he learns that he cannot violate spiritual laws with impunity. Mind in itself is believed to be a subtle form of static energy, from which arises the activities called thought, which is the dynamic phase of mind. Mind is static energy, thought is dynamic energy, the two phases of the same thing. Walker. Charles Haanel, the new psychology. Chapter 21, Philosophy. In silence was the universe conceived, in silence doth the heart of man seek out that other heart to rest on, nature's soul yearns ceaselessly to give its speechless calm, unto her restless children as they roam, far from that central place which is their home. Wouldst know thy mother nature face to face? Wouldst hear her silent heartbeats? Close thine ears and still thy senses, wouldst thou feel her arms enfold thy being? Thou must give thyself, in uttermost abandon to her will, that she may teach thee the one truth. Be still. Be still, and from the silence shall arise a memory of forgotten mysteries. A healing peace descending on thy soul shall bear it up to regions beyond words, where thou shalt learn the secrets of the earth, of wind and flame, and how the stars have birth. Then shalt thou know thy heritage of joy, borne on the pinions of the bird of life, tuned to the rhythm of revolving spheres, feeling with all that breathes, with all that strives for union with its prototype above, the silent comforter whose name is love. Francis Poyle. Physical science has resolved matter into molecules, molecules into atoms, atoms into energy, and it has remained for Mr. J. A. Fleming, in an address before the Royal Institution, to resolve this energy into mind. He says, in its ultimate essence, energy may be incomprehensible by us except as an exhibition of the direct operation of that which we call mind or will. We find, therefore, that science and religion are not in conflict, but are in perfect agreement. Mr. Leland makes this quite plain. In an article on world-making, he says, first, there is wisdom that has planned, and so adjusted, all the parts of the universe in such a perfect balance that there is no friction. And as the universe is infinite, the wisdom that has planned it must be infinite too. Secondly, there is a will that has fixed and ordained the activities and forces of the universe and bound them by laws inflexible and eternal. And everywhere this omnipotent will has established the limitations and directions of the energies and processes, and has fixed their everlasting stability and uniformity. And as the universe is infinite, this will must be infinite. And thirdly, there is a power that sustains and moves, a power that never wearies, a power which controls all forces, and, as the universe is infinite, the power must be infinite too. What shall we name this infinite trinity? Wisdom, will, and power. Science knows no simpler name for it than God. This name is all-embracing. We can conceive of something of its meaning, though we cannot comprehend its significance. And this being is the indwelling and ultimate. He is immanent in matter as in spirit, and to him all law, life, force, must be referred. He is the sustaining, energizing, all-pervading spirit of the universe. Every living thing must be sustained by this omnipotent intelligence, and we find the difference in individual lives to be largely measured by the degree of this intelligence that they manifest. It is a greater intelligence that places the animal in a higher scale of being than the plant, the man higher than the animal, and we find this increased intelligence is again indicated by the power of the individual to control modes of action and thus to consciously adjust himself to his environment. It is this adjustment that occupies the attention of the greatest minds, and this adjustment consists in nothing else than the recognition of an existing order in the universal mind, for it is well known that this mind will obey us precisely in proportion as we first obey it. As we increase in experience and development, there is a corresponding increase in the exercise of the intellect, in the range and power of feeling, in the ability to choose, in the power to will, in all executive action, in all self-consciousness. That would mean that self-consciousness is increasing, expanding, growing, developing, and enlarging. It increases and develops because it is a spiritual activity. We multiply our possession of spiritual things in proportion to our use of them. All material things are consumed in the using. There is a diametrically opposite law governing the use of the spiritual and the material. Life is that quality or principle of the universal energy that manifests in so-called organic objects as growth and voluntary activity, and which is usually coexistent in some degree with some manifestation of that same universal energy as the quality or principle termed intelligence. There is only one supreme principle evading all comprehension of its essential nature. It is the absolute. Man can think only in terms of the relative. Therefore, he sometimes defines it as the universal intelligence, the universal substance, as ether, life, mind, spirit, energy, truth, love, etc. His particular definition at any moment is governed by the particular relationship of the phenomena of being in which he thinks of this principle at that moment. Mind is present in the lowest forms of life, in the protoplasm or cell. The protoplasm or cell perceives its environment, initiates motion, and chooses its food. All these are evidences of mind. As an organism develops and becomes more complex, the cells begin to specialize, some doing one thing and some another, but all of them showing intelligence. By association their mind powers increase. Whereas in the beginning, each function of life and each action is the result of conscious thought, the habitual actions become automatic or subconscious in order that the self-conscious mind may attend to other things. The new actions will, however, in their turn, become habitual, then automatic, then subconscious, in order that the mind again may be freed from this detail and advance to still other activities. Until very recently, it was said that matter, in its ultimate nature, was eternal, though all the forms thereof change. We were told that a building destroyed by fire with nothing but a few ashes left had gone up in smoke and gas and that only the form of the manifestation had changed, that the essential substances were still in existence in different chemical formations. We were told that all forms of matter exist in the form of molecules, that these molecules are resolvable into certain smaller elements called atoms. Until recently, the atom was supposed to be the ultimate particle of matter, so until recently scientists supposed that matter could be resolved into atoms and that was final. But with the discovery of radium, it was found that the atom is made up of a large number of smaller particles called electrons or ions, and these electrons vary according to the kind of atom that is under consideration. A hydrogen atom contains a different number of electrons than an oxygen atom, and so on. The atoms within the molecules are separated from each other by very great distances as compared with their diameter. The electrons in turn are separated from each other by distances as compared to the diameter as are the planets in the solar system. When we remember that the molecule, which is the largest of the group, is so small that it cannot be discovered by the most powerful microscope, so small that you could place many millions of them into an ordinary thimble, you can conceive how infinitesimal the ultimate particle of matter called the electron or ion is. It has been discovered that the atoms of radium are constantly radiating their ions into space, producing what is called radioactivity, that these particles are apparently lost, they simply vanish. Finally, it has been discovered that other forms of matter besides radium are throwing off their ions into space, and that these seem to be absolutely lost in the process. Thus, the atoms of matter are constantly wasting away so that the modern physicist no longer claims that matter is indestructible. It is in a constant state of flux, it is forever changing in form. What then is the director which controls the action of the ion, which indicates the form that it is to take? Mind is the director, and this direction is the process called creation. It will therefore readily be seen that the basis upon which matter rests is mind or spirit. The spirit of a thing is, therefore, the thing itself. It is the spirit of a thing that attracts to itself the necessary electrons for its development from the ether and which are gradually assembled by the law of growth. It is evident, therefore, that the saying of St. Paul is true, the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. Many years ago, John Bovey Dodds wrote, "We have mounted from lead up to electricity, and though as we rose, we found each successive substance more easily moved than the one below it, still we have not as yet found a single material that possesses inherent motion as its attribute. Lead, rock, earth, and water are moved by impulse. Air is moved by rarefaction and electricity is moved by the positive and negative forces. True, we have mounted up, as before remarked, to electricity, but even this cannot move unless it is thrown out of balance in relation to quantity as to its positive and negative forces. Electricity is a fluid most inconceivably subtle, rarefied, and fine. It is computed to require 4 million particles of our air to make a speck as large as the smallest visible grain of sand, and yet electricity is more than 700,000 times finer than air. It is almost unparticled matter, and is not only invisible, but so far as we can judge, it is imponderable. It cannot be seen, it cannot be weighed. 1,000 empty Leyden jars, capable of containing a gallon each, may be placed upon the nicest scale and most accurately weighed. Then let these be filled with electricity and, so far as human sagacity can determine, they will weigh no more. Hence to our perception 1,000 gallons weigh nothing. As electricity in regard to motion stands upon the poise being completely balanced by the positive and negative forces that equalize each other, so it is easily perceived that if we mount one step higher, we must come to that substance whose nature is to move, and the result of that motion is thought and power. It is mind. Hence, it will be distinctly perceived, in view of the argument now offered, that we cannot, as philosophers, stop short of motion in the highest and most sublime substance in being. This conclusion is absolutely and positively irresistible, and challenges refutation. When we mount up in our contemplations through the various grades of matter and see it continually brightening as we press onward in our delightful career of rapture until we arrive at that sublime substance which can be neither seen nor weighed, which moves with a velocity of 12 million miles per minute and can travel around this globe in the 1/8 part of a second, we are struck with astonishment and awe. But as this is not the last link in the immeasurable chain, we are forced to proceed onward until we arrive at the finest, most sublime, and brilliant substance in being, a substance that possesses the attributes of inherent or self-motion and living power, and from which all other motion and power throughout the immeasurable universe are derived. This is the infinite mind, and possesses embodied form. It is a living being. This infinite mind comes in contact with electricity, gives to it motion, arms it with power, and through this almighty unseen agent, moves the universe and carries on all the multifarious operations of nature. Hence, there is not a motion that transpires amidst the immensity of his works, from rolling globes to the falling leaf, but what originates in the eternal mind, and by him is performed, through electricity as his agent. Mind is, therefore, the absolute perfection of all substances in being, and as it possesses self-motion as its grand attribute, so it is, in this respect, exactly the reverse of all other substances, which are, of themselves, motionless. Mind, or spirit, is above all, and absolutely disposes and controls all. Hence, mind is imponderable, invisible, and eternal. Charles Haanel, The New Psychology. Chapter 22, Science. Science is not idealistic, nor spiritualistic, nor materialistic, but simply natural. She seeks to learn everywhere facts and their logical corollaries, without doing homage in advance to a system in this or in that direction. Science, says Grove, should have neither desires nor prejudices, truth should be her sole aim. Huxley says, modern science has made its way into the works of our best poets, and even the man of letters is unconsciously impregnated with her spirit and indebted for his best products to her methods. I believe that the greatest intellectual revolution mankind has yet seen is now slowly taking place by her agency. She is teaching the world that the ultimate course of appeal is observation and experiment, and not authority. She is teaching it to estimate the value of evidence. She is creating a firm and living faith in the existence of immutable moral and physical laws, perfect obedience to which is the highest possible aim of an intelligent being. Rady did not trouble himself much with speculative consideration, but attacked particular cases of what was supposed to be spontaneous generation experimentally. Here are dead animals, or pieces of meat, he says. I expose them to the air in hot weather and in a few days they swarm with maggots. You tell me these are generated in the dead flesh, but if I put similar bodies, while quite fresh, in a jar and tie some fine gauze over the top of the jar, not a maggot makes its appearance, while the dead substances, nevertheless, putrefy in the same way as before. It is obvious, therefore, that the maggots are not generated by the corruption of the meat and that the cause of their formation must be something which is kept away by gauze. But gauze will not keep away aeriform bodies or fluids. This something must, therefore, exist in the form of solid particles too big to get through the gauze. Nor is one long left in doubt what these solid particles are, for the bough flies, attracted by the odor of the meat, swarm round the vessel and, urged by powerful but in each case misleading instinct, lay eggs out of which the maggots are immediately hatched upon the gauze. The conclusion, therefore, is unavoidable: the maggots are not generated by the meat, but the eggs which give rise to them are brought through the air by the flies. These experiments seem almost childishly simple, and one wonders how it was that no one ever thought of them before. Simple as they are, however, they are worthy of the most careful study, for every piece of experimental work done in regard to this subject has been shaped upon the model furnished by the Italian philosopher. As the results of his experiments were the same, however varied the nature of the materials he used, it is not wonderful that there arises in Redi's mind a presumption that, in all such cases of the seeming production of life from dead matter, the real explanation was the introduction of living germs from without into that dead matter. And thus the hypothesis that living matter always arises by the agency of pre-existing living matter took definite shape, and had, henceforward, a right to be considered and a claim to be refuted, in each particular case, before the production of living matter in any other way could be admitted by careful reasoners. That which endures is not one or another association of living forms, but the process of which the cosmos is the product, and of which these are among the transitory expressions. And in the living world, one of the most characteristic features of this cosmic process is the struggle for existence, the competition of each with all, the result of which is the selection, that is to say, the survival of those forms which, on the whole, are best adapted to the conditions that at any period obtain, and which are therefore, in that respect, and only in that respect, the fittest. The acme reached by the cosmic process in the vegetation of the downs is seen in the turf, with its weeds and gorse. Under the conditions, they have come out of the struggle victorious, and, by surviving, have proved that they are the fittest to survive. In the life of the mind, there must eventually be some features of absolute unity, despite the diversity that may exist in its organization. The laws of thinking are no doubt the same throughout the universe. Just as it is possible to show in the physical development of the organ of thought an uninterrupted scale of gradual development from the lowest animal to the highest human being, so a similar ascent of psychical and mental properties in every rising development may be found in him. Neither morphology, nor chemistry, nor macroscopy, nor microscopy is capable of discovering an essential difference between human and animal brains. Great though the differences may be, they are after all but differences of degree. This accounts for the absolute failure that has attended all the attempts made by some scientists, even down to our own time, to discover any such characteristic or essential differences, and on the strength of these to assign to man a special place and classification in natural history. Professor William McDougall, the distinguished professor of psychology at Harvard, in a session of the British Association for the Advancement Science at Toronto, made this very significant announcement. 30 to 40 years ago, when I began to study science, considerable moral courage would have been required to insist upon the purposive nature of man. For at that time the great wave of scientific materialism was still but little past its climax. It was the day of Spencer and Huxley, of Clifford and Tyndall, of Lang and Weissman, of Verworm and Bain. The world and all the living things in it were presented to us with so much prestige and confidence, as one vast system of mechanistic determination that one seemed to be placed before two acutely opposed alternatives. On the one hand, science and universal mechanism, on the other hand, humanism, religion, mysticism, and superstition. But the physical universe of eternal hard atoms and universal elastic ether, the realm of pure mechanics, has become a welter of entities and activities which change in development and disappear like the figures of the kaleidoscope. The atoms are gone, matter has resolved itself into energy, and what energy is no man can tell, beyond saying it is the possibility of change, of further evolution. In psychology, the mechanistic confidence of the 19th century is fading away as the complexity of the living organism is more fully realized, as its powers of compensation, self-regulation, reproduction, and repair are more fully explored. In general biology, the mechanistic neo-Darwinism is bankrupt before the problems of evolution, the origin of variation and mutations, the predominance of mind in the later stages of the evolutionary process, the indications of purposive striving at even the lowest levels, The combination of marvelous persistency of type with indefinite plasticity which pervades the realm of life and which finds its only analogue in the steadfast purposive adaptive striving of a resolute personality. Sir Oliver Lodge says, among scientific men the ether has only been studied by physicists, and not by all of them. It has been ignored by chemists and has probably never entered the thought of physiologists or biologists of any kind at all. And yet, if it is a reality in the universe, it may have chemical and biological functions to perform, as well as its well-known functions in the science of physics. We know it familiarly in the phenomena of light, of electricity, of magnetism. We are beginning to associate it also, rather definitely, with elasticity, cohesion, and gravitation. And we are gradually learning that the greater part of the energy in the universe, and certainly all potential energy, belongs to it, and not to matter at all. Atomic matter is one thing, the ether is another. They may be related. The link between them is electricity. But if it is possible ever to unify them and to regard them as different manifestations of one thing, there is no doubt which is the more fundamental of the two. The ether is the fundamental thing. Matter is a derived and secondary thing. And the electric charges which constitute matter are probably composed of modifications of the ether. And it is because they lack the clue that biologists in general feel so hostile and are conscious of such repugnance to the facts themselves. To the honor of Professor Richet, in spite of his repugnance, he is ready to accept the facts. But it seems to me that he raises unnecessary difficulties about them by his insistence on matter alone. He will never understand them in terms of matter alone. Strictly speaking, we cannot understand anything fully and completely in terms of matter alone. By concentrating on matter, we eliminate from our thoughts the greater part of the universe. The universe contains many things besides matter. It contains magnetism and electricity and light and ether, it also contains life and thought and mind and consciousness and memory and personality and character. None of these things are material, and yet, strangely enough, some of them have come into association with matter through the curious biological process of incarnation. Albert Edward Wigham says, and now, today, in the electron of the atom and in the germ cell of living protoplasm, we have at last come upon God in his own workshop. The mechanist has looked about this workshop and exclaimed, it is all machinery. The spiritualist has said, behind it is the breath of God. One has found a universe that works, the other a universe that is significant. One has found the tools, the other the workman. But whether he is mechanist or vitalist, materialist or spiritualist, both are agreed that cooperation with natural law, the will of God, is the only righteousness. This alone is organic morality. This alone is progress. I do not know what philosophy is true. I only know that unfettered philosophic thought is the only thing that can lead us to the things that are true. And I am pleading for the importance and influence of truth and that it may be in our time bravely lifted up for all men. However, if I am to trust my extremely diffident interpretation of Professor John Dewey, science and the critical speculation that has come into the world will have given two great new trends to philosophy, all of which, I think, are of great importance to the statecraft. First, philosophy has changed as to its theory of knowledge the very nature of the knowing processes of the mind. Biology has made this contribution. From the old notion that knowledge was built up out of independent sensations, that is, that the senses were the gateways to knowledge, biology has contributed the new conception that knowledge is behavior, the reaction, the hitting back of a living organism upon its environment. Knowledge thus becomes the active, operative experience of an organism carrying out the rich possibilities of the inherent structure. Not to go into technical jargon, all the old psychology that underlaid both the rationalism of the rationalist and the empiricism of the empiricist is thus completely exploded so that we can hardly realize what has become of it. Second, this change as to the nature of knowledge has brought enormous changes in our conceptions as to the nature of truth, as to what truth is and what is true. We find that truth and the way we gain knowledge are quite bound together. The old notion of a realm of unchangeable truth out in the sky somewhere has become transformed into a conception of truth as a working, living thing. Thus, the old battle between the real and the ideal, subject and object, experience and reason, noumenon and phenomenon, have become strangely obsolete because they are seen to have no practical consequence. For society is suffering primarily not from unbalanced budgets and disrupted agreements, but from wrong mental processes. Many of these processes have become institutions, for institutions, as Martin says, are simply stereotyped social habits. Consequently, the way men think is the thing that makes right or wrong, wise or foolish institutions. And there are great wrong mental processes, some of them age-old institutions that prevent the inner life from expanding to meet the new needs, and prevent them from breathing the spacious airs of a new spiritual morning with which science is ready to light the world. These mental habits are not called evils because they lie so far behind our obvious evils that they are not discerned. They do not make good newspaper headlines. Juries and investigating committees never list them as the causes of social breakdown because the juries and committees are themselves caught up in the same network of habit. But until they are observed and corrected, society can never become intelligent. And until society becomes intelligent, it can never become happy or free. In an unorthodox conception of being, William Ellsworth Hermans says, we are forced to view matter as of two planes, the material and the spiritual. The single atom is not material, it is spiritual, that is, it is simply a definite amount of power, and the power alone would be absolutely immaterial. Premising that the atoms are conscious is totally different from stating that the material is conscious. The inorganic atoms, the atoms unorganized, are not conscious on the material plane. One of the errors of materialism is in assuming that matter under certain forms may be conscious, as in the brain. They assume that as we are conscious, it must be some material portion of the person that is conscious. There is absolutely no proof that consciousness is created either as a result of motion or form, which is the monistic idea, or that it is a physical product due to a peculiar combination of matter, which is the idea of some materialists. Is it illogical or unreasonable to say the motion must primarily be carried back to the molecule and the atom? If it is so carried, the atom or the individual is where the consciousness lies. It takes more to constitute what we mean by an army than even all the persons which compose the army. The personal constituents of a mob might be exactly the same as those of the army. The difference is that one is organized and the other is not. My hypothesis is that the universal power is conscious and intelligent, that each part is conscious and intelligent, but as parts cannot be equal to the whole, so no atom or ego is equal in intelligence to the whole. On the other hand, I believe the whole is no greater than all of its parts collectively and organically, and each part is as essential to the whole, proportionally, as the whole is to the part. I do not conceive of any density whatever of the atoms. Density is an attribute of the material and one atom is not material, it is spirit, and has no material attributes. This is a typical point of difference between my conception and the materialistic conception. If the atom of hydrogen does not penetrate the parchment as readily as the atom of oxygen does, why? Unless the oxygen atom is smaller, why does it penetrate better? There is, therefore, in the living organism something besides mere physical forces or the chemistry of dead nature, something that ceases to be when life ceases. There is a vital condition in which molecules have powers that lead to resulting seed-bearing structures widely different from those of inorganic nature, and standing on altogether a higher level. There is a power of evolution, an architectural power that not only exalts chemical results, but evolves a diversity of parts and structures and a heritage of ancestral qualities of which the laws of material nature give no explanation. Auguste Comte says that the positive spirit consists in keeping oneself equally distant from two dangers: mysticism and empiricism. By mysticism he understands the recourse to non-verifiable explanations and to transcendent hypotheses. Men's imagination finds pleasure in these things, but we must be able to bring all real knowledge back to a general or particular fact. Positive science, therefore, abstains from searching after substances, ends, and even causes. It only bears upon phenomena and their relations. When, by means of observation or deduction, he has arrived at knowledge of their laws, he remains satisfied. For the knowledge of these laws allows him in certain cases to intervene in the phenomena and to substitute to the natural order an artificial order better suited to his requirements. It is thus that mechanical, astronomical, physical, chemical, and even biological phenomena are objects of relative and positive science for him today. But, as soon as the question is one of facts which originate in the human conscience or which are connected with social life and with history, an opposite tendency becomes predominant. Instead of solely seeking for the laws of phenomena, our mind desires to explain them. It wants to find the essence and the cause. The confused disturbing movements which fill the world with trouble and agitation and which unless rational harmony be at last established threaten its destruction, are not due merely to political causes. They proceed from moral disorder. And this in turn proceeds from intellectual disorder, that is to say, from a lack of principles common to all minds and from the absence of universally admitted conceptions and beliefs. For in order that a human society may subsist, a certain harmony of sentiment or even common interests among its members will not suffice. Above all things, intellectual concord that finds expression in a body of common beliefs is necessary. The number of men with sufficient leisure and enough culture to examine these conclusions and to go into their proofs will always be small. The attitude of the others must be one of submission and respect. But, differing on this point from the religious dogmas that humanity has known until now, the new faith will be demonstrated. It will contain nothing that has not been established and controlled by scientific methods, nothing that goes beyond the domain of the relative, nothing that at any moment cannot be proved to a mind capable of following the demonstration. This form of faith already exists in the case of a great number of scientific truths. Thus, all men today believe in the theory of the solar system that we owe to Copernicus, to Galileo, and to Newton. Yet how many are in a position to understand the demonstrations upon which this theory rests? They know, however, that what here is a matter of faith to them is a matter of science to others, and would be so equally for themselves had they gone through the necessary studies. The faith that is born of knowledge finds its object in an eternal order, bringing forth ceaseless change, through endless time, in endless space, the manifestation of the cosmic energy alternating between phases of potentiality and phases of explication. The deity and the universe are but one substance, at the same time both spirit and matter, thought and extension, which are the only known attributes of the deity. And if, as there is not the least reason to doubt, more highly organized living begins to exist in remote worlds, these would yet, in their superior development as rational beings, undoubtedly resemble the earthman in regard to intellect, since in the whole universe only one intelligence can be imagined that is the same everywhere, an intelligence that makes all physical laws appear as intellectual laws. Alexander Thomas Ormond, professor of philosophy, Princeton University, says, "There is a kind of popular knowledge that is not science, and this has its own value as the plain man's case goes to show, but this species soon reaches its limit, and, as a whole, it is found to be unreliable except for the roughest kind of approximation. There is, then, a threatened breakdown of the whole business of experience which is only averted by the rise of science and its exact methods. Whatever may have been true of the ancients, it is certainly the case that modern life would have been impossible without the aid of science. This help has not been merely practical. Modern science has given us a new heaven and a new earth. It has enlarged our conceptions, revolutionized our methods, and immeasurably extended the scope of our ideas of reality. It is not too much to say that the world, in which we moderns live, if it had been dreamed by an ancient, would have been regarded as too extravagant for even the kind of credence that was then attached to dreams. The truth is, when we begin to apprehend the vast function modern science has performed in the drama of modern experience, the danger is not that science will not obtain due recognition, but that it will claim a monopoly. This tendency can be redressed only by combining with a generous recognition of the place which science holds in the philosophical synthesis, an insight into the fact that there is another point of view from which consciousness becomes primate and leads to the concepts and methods of another discipline. The philosophical synthesis begins with science, but it reaches its conclusion in metaphysics. Suppose that we have grounds for asserting the existence of an absolute in the world. Have we any resources in our experience that will enable us to render this absolute in any sense intelligible? It will be clear that the reality of the idea of God will be measured by its ability to harmonize with, and in a true sense to unify, all the other real interests and ideals in life. We are in a bad predicament when our culture points east, our science north, and our religion south. To one the elements of whose experience are in such chaos as this, the idea of God cannot, in the nature of the case, have much significance. But let us suppose that our culture and our science are at one in the line of truth and that our political ideals all center in the line of good. If, then, our idea of God be that of a being in whose experience the true and the good are unified so that there can be no conflict, our religion then becomes the principle that unifies all the elements of our life and the idea of God becomes the central force in our experience. Now it is clear that the normal function of such an idea as that of God is one of unification. God stands as the ideally complete realization of all we may aspire to. He is simply the sole writ, not in large, but in transcendent terms, and the idea of him is one that ideally comprehends and completes all the elements of our experience. Naturally, then, the idea of God ought to bear to our experience and all its elements the relation of a unifying principle. The reality of the idea of God depends, therefore, on the degree to which it vitally relates itself to our experience. Were it a mere abstraction without any close connection with the life of man, it could lay little claim to reality. But that has the highest claim to reality which not only touches experience vitally at every point, but is also necessary to it as its ideal and its unifying principle. We find, therefore, in the statements of many of the greatest living scientists that pure science and pure religion are in absolute harmony, and Professor J.S. Haldane, the eminent British scientist, goes on to say, "It is only when science is dogmatic that it assumes an attitude which seems to deny the existence of spiritual reality. But, there is very little of this dogmatism in the writings of the great men of science, though very much in the desiccated science of textbooks and popular expositions. 'Tis not in time but in man's thought, that aught of good or ill is wrought, his word is law, his thought is fate, time is his servant and must wait. To bring whatever he may decree, each mortal holds the master key over time and fate and destiny." Henry Victor Morgan.